That's better. Good evening. We're now returning to open session. I will first announce the reportable action items taken in closed session. The board met in closed session to discuss the appeal of the denial of the interdistrict transfer for student C. A motion was made by Barbara Owens and seconded by Laura Anderson, and the board voted unanimously to uphold the denial of the interdistrict transfer. In regards to item 5A, the board approved the personnel summary, and a copy of the summary is available in the back. In regards to item 5D, the board approved the settlement agreement for OAH case number 2017-08-05931 for $15,725. Item 5E1 will be approved as part of the consent agenda, and which is 18C. For item 5E3, the board met in closed session to discuss a student discipline agreement. I'd like to ask the board, do we have a motion?
Yes, I move that the discipline agreement between student number 17/18-04 in the Tamalpais Union High School District be approved, and pursuant to the terms and conditions of the agreement established by the board during closed session, that the agreement will go into effect immediately.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
I believe this is a roll call vote, Mary?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Ms. Owens.
Aye.
And Ms. Lundgren.
Aye. Thank you. We'll now move on. I'd like to ask for approval of the agenda, including time limits. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Do we have any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, are there any trustees that would like any items removed from the consent agenda to be included in trustee consideration? And I'd like to open it up. Do any of the student trustees have anything on the consent agenda you'd like removed to have a discussion about? Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion then to please approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 It's gonna turn red.
You need to turn it on. Oh, is it? Oh, the little red.
There we go.
There.
So now, thank you. I'd like to move on to the student trustee reports. And is there anyone that would like to go first? Otherwise, we'll just choose one at random, one of you at random. So you're all looking down except Jacob. So Jacob, you won.
Is it on? Okay. So tonight is senior night for the TAM basketball team. It is also our whiteout game, and we are playing MC. We hope that this MC game goes better than the last one. Our basketball team has been very well this year. On Saturday, they won against SR. Last Thursday, they won against San Marin. They're playing Novato on this Thursday, and they hope to be in the playoffs, which start next week. We also have our Valentine's Day grams, which are being sold this week and will be delivered on Valentine's Day of next week. We are raising money for Planned Parenthood, and we're also raising awareness for reproductive health by giving out condoms with the Valentine's Day grams. We have a beach cleanup day on Sunday the 11th from 11 to 1, and we will be cleaning up Muir Beach. So hope to get a big turnout there. CTE, which is the TAM drama production company, just finished their one-act festival, and they were all very well done. And the Tam High mock trial team just won county for the 23rd year in a row, and they will be going to state later this semester. That's what's going on at Tam.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Okay. Today at Tamalpais, we had an informal meeting with SOAR, or Students Organized Against Racism. We talked about what can be done to increase consciousness about social justice issues, anti-racism, and equity work. Graduation planning is going on at Tamalpais, and there will be a combined graduation of all the programs, and it will be held at the Marin Garden Center in Ross. College night was held for the juniors by Counselor Grace and College and Career Specialist Julie. Juniors will get personalized attention this coming month and help with choosing colleges, financial support, and what works for them. Team has returned from their community service at Angel Island, where they stayed for 2 nights and 3 days, and they worked on repairing the trail. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Fatima.
Okay, so at San Andreas, tomorrow we are having our 3rd year WASC visit to make sure we're on track to our original plan. This month we should get final word on if we got the model student school status. This morning we had a field trip to the Exploratorium for the science classes, and I was there. It was really, really fun. I got to explore a lot of new things. Next Friday, we also have another field trip to Turtle Island and West Marin. We have a new girls group that meets every Thursday, and it's just a group of girls who feel like they need to be more supported, and if anything, feel safe, and if anything else, we need to talk about something. In Corey's peer resource class, we're beginning to do a mock trial. And that kind of gives us a way to understand the laws and the values behind them. And all the students will be playing different roles, from being the judge to the jury to the audience. Also, we are still in the process of determining ways to give back to the community. So also in peer resource, we're doing that. And our theme this year is habits of mind and our obligation to the community that we live in. We are adopting a school and providing them with books and supplies and doing fundraising activities. And our holiday food drive was very successful. We collected 1,750 pounds of food for the Marin Food Bank.
Thank you very much.
Drake had a dance last Friday. We were a bit worried about attendance for this dance because a couple weeks before, it didn't seem like many tickets were sold. But the last week before the dance, a lot of tickets were sold. So we managed to make a profit on the dance, which is good. We sold 353 tickets. In this dance, we had some more activities because we are switching it out from our old winter formals, which we're not doing anymore. So we had arcades and a silent disco, and both of them students really enjoyed and were constantly being used. So that's a really good thing. We have been having some issues with parking. Students have been either parking without a permit or been parking illegally in illegal parking places, and that affects traffic flow, and it also causes safety issues because fire trucks can't navigate the parking lot as well. So we started putting warning tags on the cars, but that hasn't had any effect. So we've contacted the Central Marin Police Department and asked them to start issuing actual tickets to students who park without a permit or illegally to try to stop this problem. And then last Thursday, we had 366 incoming 9th graders register. And this Thursday, we are finishing up scheduling the next year's classes for our current students.
Thank you, Maddie.
How many registered for 9th grade?
366.
All right. At Redwood also, students are signing up for their classes, and so we're having our AP and honors meetings around this time, as well as course workshops so that students can make informed decisions about the classes they're going to be taking. This Friday is National No One Eats Alone Day, and so it's not set in stone, we're still figuring out, but in leadership, we are planning activities around that so that hopefully nobody eats alone this Friday. And spring sport tryouts are this week. 25 students are participating in an anti-bias workshop, which should be followed up by a student-organized group against racism workshop this spring. Yeah. 3 teachers in the last few weeks have had babies at our school. That's not delivered, gave birth to. And Thursday is the 8th grade registration. And staff development tomorrow during our minimum day. The teachers will be working on efficacy and continuing to work on racial consciousness and anti-racism. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. It looks like, Barbara, you have a question?
I do. I would like to ask Caroline, how are students being transported on these field trips?
So the teachers, Patty, the attendants, they usually drive. Suzanne from the student resource, she drives as well, and Karen from the science department drives.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Jacob, what is a whiteout game?
It's an organized game to try to get student involvement. So we give out white T-shirts to every TAM student that comes to the game. So then in the bleachers, it looks like there's a uniform mass of people because they're all wearing the same T-shirt.
Got it. Does it intimidate the opposing team?
I think that's the goal.
Okay.
It could be like white out, red out, black out.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So now we move on to trustee reports. Why don't we just start from the end of the table and work our way down? So why don't you start, Laura?
Okay, I attended Drake's open house. I always love going to the open houses. Can hit a lot of teachers and students, and it's just a very efficient way to see a lot of people and see what all the students are doing. I was very impressed. Talked to a couple, I think the students get extra credit or something at CDisc and Rock, and they were very excited to share all sorts of stuff about their endeavors. I sat at the negotiations table. There are 2 trustees there with TFT a couple weeks ago, and that was a good experience. I attended the Unified Team Basketball Tournament at Drake High School that same afternoon, and boy, is that an uplifting experience to see the students running up and down the court and giving it their all. I also attended the school funding forum at the Marin County Office of Education along with many of you, so I don't need to update you on that so much. I thought that, just as an aside, a lot of the revenue discussion was targeted at LCFF districts, which we are not. We are community funded. And so I was a little disappointed that we didn't hear more about how we might be able to deal with our fiscal situation as a community funded district. But nonetheless, on the cost end of things, that applies to all of us. So I thought that was well worth our time. And then finally, I came to Redwood and listened to Congressman Huffman speak right here in this room to a room full of Redwood government students and talk about what's happening in DC. It was very interesting. And then there was a rally in the gym, and he gave 2 awards to two freshman boys. They developed a homework app and got a bunch of money, and they're going to be featured in DC, and it's very exciting. And it's the second time that a TAM district school has been honored. The whole state of California, they they won this prize. I can't remember what the prize was. And then I stayed for a little bit of the rally, which was very fun. I especially liked the Shine the Light exercise that Peer Resource did, and I just thought it was a very inclusive exercise. They asked all the students to shine a light. They're on their phones. Everyone seems to have a phone. If whatever the Peer Resource students said applied to them, and it was, I just thought it was a nice way to make a really big school and growing bigger feel a little bit smaller. So that's what I did.
Can I follow someone other than Laura next meeting, please? No, sorry. So I also attended, this was my Drake time. I went to the open house at Drake. It was a really interesting presentation. Again, I recall from last year the fact that you guys decided to do it early in the year to give students an opportunity, incoming students an opportunity to visit the small learning communities and to hear from all the teachers. It was a very inclusive presentation, Liz, which was the initial presentation, the assembly in the gym, which I thought was great. I think one of the highlights for me, well, I'll point out two highlights. I learned about, I had students show me their projects and school me in creek restoration and in building a sustainable settlement on Mars. So thank you to students for that. And I had a really interesting visit with the 3 AVID teachers there, which follows up on some time that I spent at TAM in terms of the program and the kind of support we provide students who need a little bit of extra help. It's just really very impressive, and particularly the enthusiasm with with the teachers who are involved express themselves. And then I went with Laura. We were both at the Unified Games. So I just want to call out Mr. Dibley, who was the referee and the Grand Poobah for everything that happened on the court. He was great. And also I had a chance to speak with the athletic directors who put in an extraordinary amount of time for the Unified Games. For those of you who don't know, the Unified Games are, in this case it was basketball, and it's special education students who are paired with non-special education students, and it was teams from throughout the county who participated. I recognized some of the students who I saw last year at the track and field Unifying Games, which were also at Drake, and just the whole level of enthusiasm, was and it was so participatory for everybody involved. I think everybody there got a lot out of it. So, thanks to Drake and to Liz and for hosting and putting those things on.
Yeah. Let's see, not to repeat too many things, but JLAC, the organization that's really a subcommittee of the Marin County School Boards Association, put together 3 programs on one day, and that included some more elaboration about the potential mortgage relief that may come through a program called Landed. And I think we'll have more discussion about that to serve educators in Marin County in terms of trying to give them some support so they can actually live here. What I took away from the FCMAT report was that our legislators in Sacramento are less experienced, and that they need to have these informational opportunities presented to them so that our efforts to educate and to talk about the kinds of issues that are impinging on us very directly, on our fiscal challenges, are ones that can, I hope, I expect, will be addressed to get some relief. And the last presentation was by Joe Nation, who was our former senator and a former parent of 2 Redwood High School students, who, in his capacity as a graduate professor of public policy at Stanford, has commissioned studies by his graduate students regarding the complexities of pension liability. I wouldn't presume to give you anything beyond that, but the complexity of the issue needs to be surfaced constantly so that we can begin to get more and more information that will help our legislators make some better decisions about the consequence of those costs to us. The School Boards Association of Marin County also offered a program to people who might be interested in becoming trustees or who are new trustees to give them a kind of in a workshop format. So thank you.
Okay, I'm not being Joe Cool. I forgot my regular glasses. I can't. I can only read with dark glasses on. I too went to the Drake open house, and I have to say Liz was magnificent in running the initial thing. The classes were as usual interesting. A couple of teachers mentioned to me that they felt really, really well supported by administration, Liz and Wes particularly, around the suicide that happened some months ago. That was still lingering with them. So that's a big plus. I went to the school funding forum, giving the first, and Barbara went to all three. Laura and I went to one. But the FICMAT one I thought was profoundly interesting. I think it was mentioned at the event we had up in Sacramento, the JLAC Action Day, that the bond that the state of California passed, a $9 million school bond, the governor just isn't spending any of it. He's released $600,000 of that $9 billion. I'm sorry. He's released $600,000 of the $9 billion, but they seem to say that everyone is in kind of a holding pattern until there's a new governor, at which point, quote, pandemonium will erupt. All these things that Governor Brown is trying to hold costs down on will be up in play in a year. So that's it for me.
Thank you. I do want to echo or just add a little bit. I also went to one of the forums at the county office. I went to the third one with Joe Nation, and it was very sobering. There's more resources that we can download, and I think we should share, but he really did spend time discussing pension reform and the way we kind of got ourselves into this mess. And it was very, very sobering and timely for us. In terms of the president's report, given what, we talked about this a couple meetings ago, that this time of year we usually want to, reconvene and make sure we're still in alignment with our goals and look at governance. And what we talked about a couple meetings ago was that we have so much on our plate, very critical items we need to get through. We really couldn't afford a meeting to look at governance. And so what we agreed to is that we'd keep moving forward. But occasionally during the process, like any organization does, they look inward to see, well, are we doing this well? And what can we do to improve? I'm hoping that we still will have time to do that in depth, but given what we've just experienced in the last month, and especially the last workshop, and to be honest, what spurred me to do this was when I read in the agenda packet the stakeholder feedback, and we're starting to see a few themes, emerge. I did get on the California School Board Association website, and one place that's always good to start is to look at the different roles that we have. Because if I were to look at the stakeholder themes, that transparency, setting direction. There were comments that they expected board members to do that maybe weren't really what a board member should do, and vice versa. So I just wanted to read a couple things, and again, in the light that we can be thinking about this until we can really sit down and go through it together. But basically, the roles and responsibility of the school board is that we're entrusted with governing a community's public schools. The role of the school board is to ensure that school districts are responsive to the values, beliefs, and priorities of their communities. Boards fulfill this role by performing multiple responsibilities. And the three that I just am highlighting is setting direction, ensuring accountability, and providing community leadership as advocates for children, the school district, and public schools. With this board, I'm fortunate. I think we have this unity of purpose, but I think as we move forward, we need to think very seriously about the word transparency. It's easy to think. It's a lot harder than it seems. Having something on a website doesn't mean we're transparent. Having something in a presentation at a meeting doesn't mean we're being completely transparent. And it's tough. So I think we all need to think about that as we move forward, especially the next 6 months. And I did see a quote on the website as well that said, "Transparency is the basis of good governance." And I really believe that. And I think we're doing well, but there's definitely areas we need to move forward and improve, and I look forward to hearing more from the community and helping us understand how we can better reach the community and hear from them, because one thing we're hearing is there's some people that have felt a bit surprised by what's been coming out, and I look forward to working with all of you on these issues, and I'm hoping after our March 15th deadline we can take a deep breath and spend some time drilling down into some of these as we move forward through the rest of the year. So that's all I have, and I'll move it to the superintendent report.
Thank you, President Lindgren. I'm going to focus the report around the equity work that we continue to do and my participation in that. Back on January 31st, we had the first group of TAM administration participate in what we're calling equity walks at San Andreas. We thank David Luongo and his staff for indulging us in this. We spent time reviewing the goals, successes, and struggles as it relates to racial equity. Then we broke into 2 groups and visited approximately half the classrooms to observe the teaching and learning through an equity lens. Afterwards, the group debriefed, shared the progress we saw being made in this area with the principal. I believe this will occur a few more times at San Andreas until all the administration in the district has participated in this process. We will then bring that back to our larger district equity leadership team. We're calling that DELT group later this month. The equity work continues. I participated in a presentation supported by Marin Promise at Dominican last Thursday. As president of Policy Link, Dr. McAfee talked about what he calls the Equity Manifesto. Without getting into all the details, and I quote, "Equity is the just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. Unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all." That's from the manifesto as presented by Dr. McAfee. Lastly, on last Friday, I took part in a professional development with a diverse group of leaders at the county office in what they called One Marin 2.0. It was a day spent on discussion and reflecting on the issues of bias and equity in our county. While I agree that it's going to be hard to dig deep with such a diverse group of stakeholders, it was an important opportunity to see how equity work needs to cross many sectors of a community if we want to have a substantial impact, and thus the work continues. I'll close with we will observe a district break from February 19th through the 23rd, and our next board meeting will be on February 27th. Thank you. I think I have board communications next. Just one item on the communications. We have an email from Ms. Wilkinson, Executive Director of the Tam High Foundation, dated January 26th. This is regarding Tam High Foundation meeting dates in April and May. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to also state that something I meant to state earlier, and thank you, Trustee Owens, for reminding me. I don't know how it slipped, but I didn't realize it until a few days ago that this week is Counselor Appreciation Week. And I think we, as the school board members, administrators, teachers, counselors, we see every day everything the counselors have, do for our students, and we hear about it, and especially during times of crisis. Many of us on the board are, parents, and we experience firsthand. It's more than academic counseling for sure. Somewhere between, life coach, and then if a student needs more, they're right there to refer your student to somebody that's can provide counseling. So I know that we really, really appreciate our counselors, and I'd like us to talk further about how we can show them more of an official appreciation But maybe that could be for the next meeting. Thank you. So now we'll move on, and this is the time where we have public comments on items that are not on the agenda. I am going to read a statement, and then I'll invite anyone that's here that would like to make a public comment that's not on the agenda to line up and come to the podium. But let me read the statement for you, and I can provide some clarification if you need it. The board recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and provides this time for members of the audience to address the board on any social-related matter not on the agenda. The board can take no action at this time. Each speaker is requested to identify themselves prior to addressing the board and will be heard for up to 3 minutes. The presiding officer of the board shall determine, based on time constraints of the board, whether some time less than 3 minutes shall be allocated to individual speakers. So I do really appreciate, I know we've gotten 3 cards up here of people that would like to speak, and that helps us when we're putting together the meeting summary. But if anyone else would like to get up and speak, please do so. And if you'd like, I can call your names, but if you'd rather just line up, we can do it that way as well. I do want to expand on one part of this. People often make a comment that they're talking to 5 mannequins up here and during public comment, and that really is in statute that if we start having a dialogue with you, then it's becoming an agenda item, and the greater public has not been noticed, so they're not here. So that, please don't mistake our not responding, that we're not hearing you. So thank you, and I'll invite you to come to the podium, and if you could please identify yourself, and just keep in mind we're trying to stick within 3 minutes, and Lars Christensen will be here to let you know when as we hit each minute. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Eva Reeder. I've taught here 16 years, 15 at Tam High. I've been nervous to speak tonight for fear of retaliation, be it to my schedule or otherwise, but it's time my story be heard. It's time I say me too. In my tenure at TAM, students have sexually harassed me over a dozen times. I've been slandered by a student spreading a rumor that I made a drunken sexual advance on him at a party. I have been touched more than once by a student who also argued it was okay to describe his masturbatory habits in my classroom. I have received profane phone calls and lascivious attacks to my work and personal email addresses, some identified as coming from the school IP address during school hours. All of them are so graphic and lewd they aren't fit for this public audience, but I can provide them if needed. These are only some of the more egregious offenses I've experienced, and like other women in this district, I have been sexually harassed, stalked, intimidated, threatened, bullied, slandered, and defamed by male students. After the single harassment incident deemed significant enough to reach the board in 2014, I was provided for the first time ed and board code policies governing appropriate age-level training for all students, not just freshmen, in social issues. From my numerous inquiries since, the initiatives proposed by former admin, HR, and MCOE have either briefly appeared in a haphazard way or were dropped entirely. At this time, many incidents I've described remain unresolved, and the trauma they've induced has led to medical conditions for which I've chosen to take a partial leave next year. But I am not here to speak solely on being harassed. I'm here to discuss some of the responses I've received from my principal, human resources, former site admin now at the DO, and our superintendent, if I've received any response at all. When I have reported several incidents where I was sexually harassed, the sexually inappropriate commentary still happening in classes these days, or the need for adequate training, the following are examples of what I've heard. Did I truly believe student training would have prevented these situations from occurring? Quote, I want to get a sense of the scope of this issue before I commit to anything further. Quote, please accept this please accept this missive as receipt of your email. And finally, while it's unfortunate and horrific this continues happening to me, my experience is an isolated one, not a widespread problem. But clearly, after hearing public comment at the last board meeting, this is a widespread problem. It's a district-wide negligence problem. So I ask the board, how do we, female teachers who have confronted various forms of sexual harassment, confidently convey to female students that they will be supported, believed, protected, or safe in a district that has repeatedly failed to support, believe, or at times even respond to us in similar situations? And how do you as a board collect the data on this serious issue, or effectively promote a safe learning environment that includes comprehensive sexual harassment training to protect and educate our students? Inaction is an action. How far will this escalate before the board takes real action? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Luke Chamberlain. I'm a social studies teacher at TAM. I've been there for a while now, and I have not been sexually harassed because I'm male. I am here, however, to give you some firsthand accounts of the misogyny that's pretty typical in our student body so that you know how widespread this particular issue is. Every year in my U.S. history class, I have them do a particular lesson where we look at slang from the 1920s, and we see how some of the slang has stayed with us and some of it has disappeared. I am, every year, without a doubt, horrified, because part of that lesson is that they do a skit with 1920s slang, and then I have them do the exact same skit with current slang. I am amazed every year at how it changes and how misogynistic it is. It is not at all surprising to me that male students feel that they have the power dynamics available in our society to harass female teachers or anyone else. And while I think we do a pretty good job of dealing with sexual harassment against students, I think we do a pretty poor job of dealing with it against others. And I would like the board, please, I'm asking for specific action from you eventually, the board and the district admin, to act to revisit the board policies on sexual harassment to make sure that no one is sexually harassed by anyone else in the future. And believe me, I could talk about the sociological or psychological reasons that these things exist, but I have absolutely no problem believing that there is sexual harassment happening on a regular basis, and that it's truly destructive. I have seen it in individual cases from one student to another, and it is almost always male to female. What are we teaching our kids? If we don't take this one on seriously, as we do, and I think we are improving this year with racism, we need to address sexism as much as we can. And I am white, heterosexual male. I've had all the privileges in the world. I am not going to be a bystander. So I'm speaking up. Please act.
Thank you. Are there any other public comment? We'll now move on to item 17, trustee considerations. And the first item is report on goals, teaching and learning, equity, access, and student wellness with Dr. Topier.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I would like to highlight some success we have had in our AVID program. Part of the AVID requirement is that we gather data at each semester in various shapes and forms, and I have just started really compiling the data to see what's going on with our AVID students. This is our first year of implementing AVID, which is a program to support students who may struggle with academic success around building academic skills and a college readiness and college going culture. So the data I'm going to share tonight is from TAM. However, we have had success with all of our sites, TAM, Drake, and Redwood. And Drake actually has 3 sections of AVID going right now. So at TAM High, they have 23 students in the one AVID elective. And the data that I have to share with you tonight is GPA from semester 1 over GPA from semester 1 last year for these 23 students. Of the 23 students, 20 of them currently have GPAs over 3.0. The average increase of GPA was 0.5 points. The largest gain was a 2-point increase from one student. We only had one student fall below a 2.0, and 22 of the 23 students increased their GPA. So we are hoping I will bring further data from Drake and Redwood forward, but that's just sort of a snapshot of how we are capturing some of the successes that we're having with our AVID students. Yes.
Will there be additional data about chronic absence reduction?
We collect a bunch of, we have
We
to
do.
report it, a lot of data, yes.
Yeah,
So
great.
attendance is part of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
This is like a tip-off that we're going to ask a question. We have to turn our mic on. Do you know what the numbers are at the other sites? We have 23 at TAM. And do you know how many students are in the AVID program at Drake and at Redwood?
I don't know off the top of my head. Let's you know the number at Drake. 70 at Drake. And I think Redwood started, their class was right around 24 first semester also.
Thank you.
Have you done similar comparisons before with the academic workshop class?
We have not, but that's something we're going to do as sort of a control, if you will, to see
Yeah.
what.
Student trustees, do any of you have any questions? Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
So the next item is approval of the midterm WASC report for Sir Francis Drake High School. And I'm assuming, yeah, it's just, there you are.
Thank you. First of all, Chuck, to address your question, my second year here, I did a very comprehensive study of the AW classes, and most students in AW actually went down in their GPA and overall grades. So that's what brought me actually about wanting to challenge the AW system and bring AVID to
That's a
Drake.
hell of a control group. Yeah. The placebo does better.
There you go. So thank you so much for having me here tonight, and I understand I'm just going to answer some questions, but in a nutshell, 3 years into our WASC report from 3 years ago, and hopefully you had a chance to take a look at our Chapter 2. We have been extraordinarily busy at Drake High School. Chapter 2 goes into all the changes that have taken place over 3 years, and I was impressed as the staff developed that list to sit back and just kind of say, wow, we've been up to a lot of stuff. So, so that was kind of our first step, was kind of gathering what it is that we've been doing. Of course, take a look at our data study. Chapter 3 goes into extensively kind of what we've done to create this particular study in the last, 6 months or so. Predominantly our teacher leaders take the role on this one because it is just a 3-year midterm report. So they've been doing a lot of work as a teacher leader body, going out to the staff, coming back as a teacher leader body. And then of course working with the Drake Leadership Council, our DLC, which is our site council, who've looked at it several times throughout the year and then approved it last week. So that's been kind of the process. And then what I find most interesting, I always love Chapter 4, which is an extensive review of what it is they recommended us to take a look at and what we've done. I think it's a very honest appraisal. I think there's a lot in there that we have tackled, and there's some stuff that we really haven't yet. And so it gives us some stuff to do over the next 2 years. And then I'm not sure different than the other schools, but we really jumped into our action plan and kind of tore it apart. So if you actually look at our action plan from 3 years ago and now, it's pretty different. And a lot of that had to do with the work that we really wanted to take a look at around equity, as well as our restorative practices work. So that's deeply reflected, and we actually have quite a different plan, which WASC would embrace that you do. They don't want you to stick to a plan if it's not really what you're doing. So we had a very fun time back in August as a leadership team, kind of pulling that thing apart and actually saying we want this to reflect the work we have done and what we want to do over the next 2 years. So in a nutshell, that is Drake High School WASC. Questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Michael.
I have a question.
I said go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, okay. So first I want to commend you for finding so many different shades of green to put
We can do green.
in the charts. That was very creative. So we had a chance to look at Redwood's version of this. It was either at the last meeting or the meeting beforehand. And what I recall, a statistic I didn't see here was participation rates for the ACT. And what was interesting was in the Redwood report, there was a participation rate, including showing increased participation rates, including by ethnic groups in the ACT but I don't recall there being an SAT, and David Sondheim had said that the ACT is becoming more popular. But in your report, I see similar statistics for SAT preparation, but I don't see anything about ACT, and I'm wondering, did I miss it, or why that is?
Most likely, we took the data that was given to us from Tara and Kim's office, which we deeply appreciate them running all that data for us. My guess would be that it was something Redwood was probably interested in taking a look at that. That might have even been one of their goals or focus areas.
Right.
So they might have dug a little deeper into their ACT data. It's something that we haven't seen extensive growth in either of our two areas as far as number of students participating in it. So it wasn't something that we necessarily built into our opportunity and access goal. So that's probably why we didn't include it as much.
Well, it was there, but on a much later page
Right.
than the SAT stuff.
Yeah, but the SAT was, I did notice that too. And this was something I had a group of teacher leaders and my new assistant principal, Liz Chacon, kind of take over the data part of it. And they were quite fascinated with the SAT data. As you might have noticed, there's a lot of SAT data in there.
Right.
Do you have any further questions? Are
No,
you done with
thank
that? Okay.
No, thank you, Michael, for that. That would be my best guess as to why Redwood jumped so deeply into their ACT work.
So Chuck, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a couple. You had one chart in there on percent ready for college coursework. What's that based on? What's the criteria?
Most of that is based on the CSU A to G the coursework that they've taken to be a UC A to G ready.
Okay, so if they've just completed the A to G, then they're college ready. And this actually is a question for David. On page 71, there was on the suspension rates, there was, with TAM High, it was like way up there, and then it dropped down one year, and then it went way back. But it went from, huge number of suspensions to almost no suspensions, back to, much huger numbers. I'm wondering what that is all about.
And that might be something that TAM can address when they come up next time.
David.
I know, I understand it as David. I will say when we were looking.
I'm not asking you.
But it's still some interesting stuff. For example, we were looking at our suspension data and we were wondering we had 2 years in there where we had some really high numbers and we were like, what is going on? And we actually then really took a look at the students who we were dealing with that year. In one particular year, we had one student who we suspended over 6 times in our brave attempts to work deeply with this student, and that heavily affected our suspension data because that's so rare at Drake to do that. And we just, again, we were all in. We were going to make this work for this kid. And that's sometimes the hit you take, and I'm actually really proud of our work for that. I cannot speak to what TAMS is, but there was this one year where we were like, whoo, and we were like, oh, there he is.
Was it the restorative justice?
We'll take a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went from more than 30
I
to
just
less than
remember-
5, back
yeah.
up to 20-something.
So I'll work with Tara's office, page 71 of the report, so I have that noted.
Yeah. And then you referred to a technology survey that you do. Can we see that?
Sure. I
Yeah.
know that it was something we were working on pretty extensively about 1.5 years ago. It was coming out of Tara and Rose's office kind of jointly. And we did give that and get some results, and that's been driving some of our work around technology. So I'm sure Tara can get that to you.
Okay, yeah, I'd be really interested in that. And just a general comment, this isn't specific to Drake, but, having, seen the Redwood one, there's not a lot of student voice in these things. That we don't seem to survey students at least in any way that the board sees about, how students feel, what's going on with their education, in the way that we used to do a perception survey years ago.
Well, again, I
Interesting.
can't speak to the schools. We actually have a big part of our action plan, and something we've been really proud of at Drake High School is the use of our student senate. And we've gone from a student senate where when we did our WAS report 3 years ago, we had less than 10 members. We're now over about 65 members every time the student senate meets, which is every 2 weeks. And pieces of this WASPN, they might not know it when we bring it to them, but we're like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Is a really significant part of our student senate. So it shows up more in our plan in here than you might see in other places. And surveying, what we've also found too is that we have some survey exhaustion
You give too many
Yeah.
surveys and the kids just start going C, 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 C.
Right.
So we don't get really good data from that. So we've saved a lot of our surveying more for what you'll hear about in a little bit, some of our wellness evaluation data, California Healthy Kids, that kind of stuff. And so we kind of tend to do more just getting live voice. So I go to all the student senate meetings and I take crazy notes on what the kids are saying. So we've kind of shifted that way as far as getting kids' input on stuff like this. But again, I cannot speak to the other schools.
Yeah, you know, these
Thank
are
you.
these are our most crucial stakeholders.
Yep.
Yeah, they are the
And, you know,
stakeholders that we
and-
work for.
and, you know, we're not really
Yeah,
getting
Yeah.
that's an
getting
interesting
it
point.
directly from them.
And that's
it's
actually one of our
it's frustrating.
That's one
Yeah.
of our biggest goals in our goals section 3 is to increase our student voice.
And, you know, I remember back from when we did the perception survey, the really striking thing about it was because we surveyed teachers, parents, and students, that the students were describing a very different environment than the parents and teachers were. It was very, very striking. So I think, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Should look into that.
You know, I think we need to keep hearing from
Yeah.
them.
No, that's a good point. How about if we go to Laura and then to Barbara? If you can switch,
Yeah.
if you want to flip, that's fine, but I just want.
I have a quick comment. I really appreciated both Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 enumerated the differences between your smaller learning communities in a nice, concise way. There's been a lot of change over the last couple of years, and I just thought it was helpful to have it in a couple paragraphs, what I'm going to screw it up, the Learning Collaborative is and what it replaced, and what Da Vinci is and what it focused on. And I'm wondering if you have that synopsis on Drake's website, if anyone, you know, like incoming 8th graders or whomever wants to know the differences between the SLCs, just as an informational thing. As a board member, I know more than most parents out there, and it's still very helpful to see it written out like that. So that was one comment. And then I'm wondering, we have the WASC reports on our websites. This is a district-wide question. Each site has the WASC report, and I'm wondering if we're required to have the midterm report that we're now seeing and approving from all our sites also on the websites, or if that's not required. I don't know if, Liz, you can answer that.
Well, I
or-
think it really depends on the school site. For example, Drake will, because our action plans change so much, but we'll wait till after our WASC visit, March 19th and 20th, to get the feedback, because part of the WASC process is going through that visit and then sitting down with your WASC team, and they'll give you input that we can still go in and make changes to our WASC plan. The report, not so much, because that's really a reporting device, but the plan is our plan for the next 2 years. So we want to get that input from WASC. So once we hear it from them, we meet with the teacher leadership team and make some changes, then we will definitely be posting the plan on our website, and most likely our report as well.
And like Leslie was mentioning, Trustee Lundgren, that will help us with our transparency too. Just
Absolutely.
putting the action plans for all sites on their sites. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Laura. So Barbara.
I too would like to commend the work, because I know the hours that go into it and the fatigue that comes with trying to put that thing together and trying to make it clear. I think there's a change, at least in my experience, that in the past WASC reports, when I was helping with them, were not necessarily public. We didn't have websites. People weren't going to come and read that 100 pages or so, and now it is. And I think that does mean that we have to spend more resources and more time to support the composition of these reports, because they are so public. So there's a lot of work there, and I hope that's not for you, Liz, but I think as a district and support team that we can consider in 3 years from now, the kind of support that you all are going to need to be able to pull this off as a public document. I'd also like to comment, or at least ask for feedback. Your plans and the progress that you've made addressing issues that have been raised in the past 3 years seem to depend a great deal on teacher leader action and participation. Can you comment about that?
Well, a lot of it depends on the teachers, and so much of our teacher information and most of our teacher collaboration and training time is actually spent in teacher departments, which are overseen by our teacher leaders. So I would say almost all of it, especially in instruction, curriculum, and assessment, which are the most important things we do, that is all overseen and organized by our teacher leaders and all the professional development that they supply, all the PLC guidance that they give. There's a lot going out in those departments. So it is very heavily based on what our teacher leaders are doing, which go back to our teacher leader meetings where we do so much of the development of what kind of professional development are they taking out to their teachers and the like. So absolutely, it's very, very, very heavy based on them, and they want it that way. I mean, they've asked for it to be something that they take on, and then they make sure that their teachers know out in the departments. They're working out with kids, reporting back, and then coming together as a teacher leader team and saying, okay, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change?
Is that it, Barbara?
Yes, thank you.
So I didn't really have anything to add, except actually building on what Barbara and Laura were mentioning. I'm not sure if we already do this or not, but I think we tried it with the LCAP, such a large document. And do we have a one-page dashboard fact sheet that describes, so a parent could just take a quick glance?
I have in the past done a one-page overview of the plan. The report,
is just practically impossible. Yeah, I don't know how you would do it.
Not
but
suffer, it's lovely reading. It's
right.
Really special. But the plan I have done in the past, kind of a one-page synopsis. And actually, I do that every year as a part of our the single plan for student achievement, which is our annual report, just like a one-page overview, so you can kind of read what our main goals are and what's our focus for that year.
Okay.
So that's probably the best place to find that, and that's also posted on our website every year.
Perfect. Thank you. Do the student go ahead? I'm sorry.
I'm going to go back to what I mentioned before, just to drill down a little bit on the ACT, SAT. So on page 13 of the action plan, the district-wide goal is articulated as provide all students opportunity and access to college, preparatory, and higher-level course offerings to prepare all students for post-high school success. And one of the measurements that you have is by 2020, SAT participation rates will increase by 3% for all students. So I'm just trying to assimilate the information that I have here as well as the information that we heard in Redwoods. And if in fact students have the choice now in terms of with respect to college entrance exam, standard tests, to take the ACT or the SAT, and trends with respect to which tests students take tends to change. Some students may take more than one test, but some may select one in lieu of the other. I'm wondering if a goal that just measures SAT participation rates doesn't really capture the data, as well as is coming up with a goal that takes into account both ACT as well as SAT
That's a good point.
preparation
Thank you,
rates.
Yeah. I think we've just traditionally been tracking SAT so closely at Drake, and the counselors, that was something that they were interested in tracking, but I'm sure that we would be happy to add ACT in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious, but
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of kids who think that the ACT plays more to their strengths than the SAT does, and you wouldn't, if we don't capture that in here, then I don't think we're getting necessarily getting an accurate picture. And frankly, it may. And if students are migrating to the ACT rather than the SAT, it's also it'll put a damper on any increased participation rates in the SAT, which would not be a reflection of Drake's performance. Rather, it's a different kind of issue. So.
No, good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if any of the student trustees have any questions about this particular report, or just WASC in general. I mean, we've had 3 now, maybe 4. Do you have any general questions? Do you know even what it is, or do you care to know?
I have a very specific question regarding the SAT participation goal. So at the JLAC convention a few weeks ago, we learned about a bill that's trying to get passed that will allow schools to replace the SBAC test with either the SAT or ACT. Given your goal for the increased participation rate, would Drake be in favor of this?
I would have to know more about that. I've heard of it kind of peripherally, but I'd want to study that a little bit deeper and take a look at what that would do. My biggest question there would be, of course, who takes the SAT and access, as opposed to what we're currently doing with the SBAC, where all happy juniors get involved, and it gives me a really good reading of all my kiddos. That would be my only thinking just right off the top of my head, Jacob, but excellent question, and thank you for raising that. I see Tara nodding her head the whole time too, so it sounds like something that we will be having some good conversations about.
Thank you.
There's a context, the
Go
SAT,
ahead. Sorry.
SAT thing needs to be looked at in, and according to Business Week a couple of years ago when SAT changed, SAT had one reason for changing Business Week, simply said it was in response to ACT taking market share away. So, a move by the SAT, to supplant a college board is simply a matter of market, can be viewed as a matter of of gaining market share over the ACT. So it's these two behemoth corporate entities duking it out with each other.
Thank you, Chuck. Anything else? Okay, so I think it's time. Can I have a motion to approve the midterm WASC report for Sir Francis Drake High School?
Do we have any public comment on this?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Former president. Do we have any public comment? Oh, yes, absolutely. Please come to the podium.
Hi, good evening. I'm Bridget Clark, and I'm a Drake parent. Having had two kids go through two different academies, I appreciated your comments about the student voice, because I know how different they can be for different students, and I'd love to hear and maybe see a little bit of evaluation or surveying from the kids, because one thing I do hear about, and I was noticing in registration a year or two ago when a parent came up to register their child, they said, yeah, my son wants to sign up for the academy that has less homework. And I thought, interesting that this is the word on the street. So there is, and I don't know how to solve all the issues, but I just want to make sure that we're, trying to, as consistent as possible with, whether it comes to stress and anxiety or what have you, that as much as we can, we're listening to what the kids are saying, because I think that's an important piece to consider. And I can give, my kids' opinion, but not right now. And the other thing, I want to thank you for looking at the restorative practices, because I think that's really key. One concern I have, with the coalition work that I've been working on is the fact that kids do need help. And I think that with some of the suspensions, I'm not so sure that in-house suspensions is the way to go. And I know that you've been working more with youth court and trying to look at different ideas. And I do feel that not just for the WASC report, but in general, that that's really important, because I know of first offenses that, happen maybe at a dance, and, the kids talk to parents, and it does get out whether the kids are, what happens in terms of their punishment, so to speak. And not that we want punishment, we really want the kids to get the help they need, is really where I come from. And I'm, go youth advocate kind of person. So I just wanted to mention those two things. And I know it's a huge report. I didn't get to all of the details myself, but those things stood out for me. And thank you for doing all the work you're doing on this. I think that's it. I just wanted to kind of plug the student voice part. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I can quickly respond to both of those. Actually, our third goal, which has to do with developing school-wide practices, the very last action step is developing a small learning community feedback tool. The Drake the Drake leadership team, our DLC site council, actually formulated some pieces to that tool, and I have a teacher working on it this year, hoping to put together both a student survey and a staff survey on our small learning communities to get some beginning feedback for our teachers about the different small learning communities. So that is a part of our action plan. And what Bridget was talking about was restorative justice. We're actually doing restorative practices, and it's a 3-year kind of training. Next year is the year we're jumping into restorative justice. So we needed to start with relationship building. This year, our big focus has been on equity, inclusion, and diversity, and next year we'll get into justice, because the belief with the group that we're working with is you need to have really solid relationships. You need to have a culture that's very inclusive, so all of your people who are in your school community feel like they're a part of it before you can start tackling harm and harm reduction. So it's a really comprehensive program that we're working on, and we're getting to the justice piece next year. So hopefully that answered both of Bridget's thoughts there.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank
So
you.
I think now we're ready to move for a, not move, but I'll ask for a motion to approve the midterm WASC report for Sir Francis Drake High School.
I move that we approve the midterm WASC report for Drake High School.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Would you like a preferential vote? I see a nod, so with the student trustees, please, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I think I heard all ayes, so I won't ask for the nays. So for trustees, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That passed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Liz. So now we move on to item C, and very pleased that we've been looking forward to this presentation. We have Mr. Godby to report on the public opinion polling by Godby Research.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. I'm pleased to be here. I'm Brian Godby, and I'm going to go through a brief presentation of the findings of our recent survey for you this evening. Okay. To begin with, as you know, the purpose of the survey was to look at several different items. The first was perceptions of the district and whether you're providing a quality education to the students. The second was to look at potential voter support for a parcel tax survey, and there's a couple of permutations of that that we'll look at as we go through here. Third was several batteries of questions where we looked at projects and programs to be funded with the proceeds, as well as informational or critical statements to see how all of those impacted voter support. And finally, we wanted to look at rate and duration or sunset issues to see if those had an impact on support for the measure. There, of course, is a variety of demographic and behavioral characteristics that we use to first validate the sample, make sure that it's reflective of the population that we intend, and also it gives us the ability to segment the data as well. In terms of the methodology, this was a landline, cell phone, text to online, and email to online survey. Gone are the days where we just made calls to landlines. Unfortunately, it was much easier then, but not very accurate anymore. So as you can see, we called and emailed and texted all those different people that responded. The universe that we looked at was the November 2018 universe, and the subset within that, June 2018. We were in the field in mid-January. The average phone survey was 20 minutes in length. We don't know how long it takes people to do the online surveys because you can get up and walk away from it and come back and after having dinner or whatever it might be. We do know that people hit the final submit button 24 hours a day. Which is great because in the old days we only had a narrow window that we could call them, and now they can participate in the survey on their time frame rather than on what we think is appropriate for just calling. That led to a sample size of 682 likely November voters and 509 likely June voters. Again, that's a subset, as I mentioned earlier, and you can look at both of them at the same time. That gives us an error rate of plus or minus 3.73 for the likely November 18 universe and 4.43 for the likely June. If you round those, they both really round up and down to 4%. Moving into the data itself, as I mentioned, the first question was one about the quality of education. So this is the voters' perception of that, and this reflects the November 2018 universe, so the larger group of people. We ask, do you have a very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, or very unfavorable perception? For analytical purposes, we combine the very favorable, somewhat favorable, and same thing on the negative side together. So we get 69.6% favorable, 70% in round numbers, and 6.6% unfavorable. We then do a ratio of positive to negative, which is 10.5 to 1, which is really a great place to be. We've seen districts be as successful with a parcel tax measure with that ratio being as low as 1.9 to 1. So you're 5 times that or a little more. So that's a good place to be. Moving on to the next question, and really a separate set of the survey, we looked at a couple different versions of the parcel tax. They're labeled as Sample A and Sample B, but essentially what we did is we split the 682 respondents in half in a random basis. So half of the respondents got this question that you see in the box on the yellow box on the right-hand side of the slide, where we're basically asking if they would double the tax rate from $285 per parcel to twice that by adding another $285. We then asked, would you definitely vote yes, probably vote yes, same thing on the negative side, or don't know. What you see here in the June election, on the top, we're at about 59%. The way we determine feasibility is we add the probable yes and definitely yes together, and have been successful predicting that based on that for 30 years. 59 is not a bad place to start for the June election for a tax that would double the current rate. It's not a good place to start. It's a long way from 59 to 66.7. For November 2018, we're at 62.6. That's an okay place to start. That's certainly doable if we go up from there. It's a lot more reachable.
So can I ask a question? Do you mind if I interrupt you here? So what accounts, in your judgment, for the difference between the June and November data?
It's age, number one. There are fewer seniors in the November election. If we had looked at the November 2020 election, you would probably see an even greater difference because there are even fewer, yet again, seniors in that group, meaning that they're more likely to be parents. And when we looked at the age data, and I was just looking at it again before we started the presentation, the best groups are the 18 to 29, the 30 to 39, and the 40 to 49. The 50 plus is where we have problems, but they are a bigger percentage of the smaller turnout elections that June is one of.
And that's just a function of the fact that younger cohorts are more likely to vote in the general election, in the November election, than in the June election?
I would say it the other way around. I'd say the younger cohorts are less likely to vote in the June election.
Okay.
Can I ask one clarifying question as well?
Sure.
You described the 59% figure as not bad, but not good for a June election. And what is that based on? Are you saying it's because it's February and we only have a few months to improve that, or to educate people to see if they would change their vote? Why is it not good?
Well, it's just not an indication that we can get to, and you'll see how we move throughout the survey, and so this is the first test. But
So it's not time dependent. It's not because June is around the corner. I think that was my question.
That's part of it,
okay.
but that's not the basis.
That's not the basis. Okay,
the basis
thank you.
Is the natural turnout that we have to start with.
All right, thank you.
So the second question, second ballot question that we asked, as I said, was a different tax rate. So in this case, it's still a 15-year renewal, but instead of adding 285 to the current 285, we're adding 143. So it's a 50% increase, whereas the previous was 100% or doubling it. And you can see here right away the dramatic difference that makes. In both the June 2018 and the November 2018, we're at 70.1. So that's a really strong place to start for a measure that needs 66.7% to be successful. Now, that doesn't mean that you throw this on the ballot in either election and go off and plan the party, because there's a lot of hard work between here and there, and that's really identified by the gold portion of the bars, where while we think it's feasible at this stage in the process, and again, we have more to talk about, you still have 30% that you got to keep on board. And that's the key to what you have to do between now and whenever you have this actually on the ballot. But that's a good place to be, very good place to be. The next set of questions is really on a couple slides.
I'm sorry, we're gonna make you earn your keep here tonight.
No problem.
So we didn't have this ahead of time, so we're kind of reacting on the fly a little bit. But I don't see, when you look at the definitely no column with respect to whether it's a 100% increase or a 50% increase, I'm not seeing a real material difference, which leads me to believe that there's just going to be this core group of voters who are going to vote no, pretty much whatever we put on the ballot.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, and that's true everywhere.
Right.
And remember, the 2/3 threshold is a pretty high threshold to surmount, even in this county. I mean, it's harder in other parts of the county, of the state, but it's certainly high everywhere. So you always, there's always ultimately at the end of the day 25%, not just the 15, 17% that you see in both of these charts. I mean, there's 25% that are going to vote no on tax in California everywhere.
And what about voter participation rates of that cohort, right? Are there, do we know whether they're more likely or less likely to vote in a November as opposed to a June ballot?
Those which cohort are you?
The definite no's.
Oh, well, so everybody in these universes that we're looking at are likely to vote in these particular particular races. So that's already calculated in when we did the sampling.
All right.
Okay. So the next two slides represent what we call the features of the measure. In short, these are the things that you might spend the money on. This is a longer list of items. We read these, or they're read. The person can read them online in a random order. So the order that you see them here is the order of the priority after we do the survey. And the way we create that priority is we assign numeric values to each of the responses that they have. There's a much more likely response, which is a 2, a somewhat more likely is a 1, a somewhat less likely is a -1, and a much less likely is a -2, which gives us a 4-point scale that ranges from a +2 if everybody were to say, I'm much more likely to support the measure based on that, down to a -2 if everybody were to say they're much less likely to support the measure based on that. The reason we do this, because although it seems somewhat abstract, is because you could have an item that is 40% much more likely and 20% somewhat more likely. That adds up to 60%. You could have another item that is the opposite. It's 20% much more likely and 40% somewhat more likely. It's still 60%, but clearly those are different 60%, and we're not even talking about the negative side of the equation. So this mean score, as we call it, gives you a ranking that's very sensitive to the intensity of the entire scale vis-a-vis each of the items. We also look at what we call tiers, and those are really statistical groupings. While they may be numerically different within a single tier, they're not statistically different. And you'll see that as we go through here. In our top tier then for the November universe, we have provide high quality science, technology, engineering, math, reading and writing instruction at 1.34 on our mean score scale. That equates to basically 80% in round numbers, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So obviously that's a really important feature of this. We also have attract and retain high quality teachers at virtually the same level as is provide hands-on science instruction, and then attract and retain high quality teachers and counselors and staff. You'll probably note 2 of those are very similar, but we wanted to test the difference between just attract and retain high quality teachers and then add the staff and counselors to that. Those were asked of separate splits in the survey as well. Another set of splits actually than the ballot questions. And what it tells us is there's really no difference between those two ways of asking it. We range, as I said, from 80%, at least somewhat more likely at the high end, down to 74%, at least somewhat more likely at the low end of Tier 1. So again, if you go back to those error rates that I talked about at the beginning, you can see we're well within the error rate when we look at just the margin of error. It's also another calculation that we do as well. In our second tier, we have maintained small class sizes, support performing art, music, and art programs, provide career development and vocational job training programs for high school students, and provide college preparation programs and resources for all students. Now that's the top part of Tier 2, which ranges down to about 71, 72%, at least somewhat more likely, 1.6 on our mean score scale. So everything on this page is above the 2/3 threshold, and even with the 4% error rate in round numbers for November, is above the 2/3 threshold that we need to be at, even when we look at the error rate on the downside. When we get to the next slide, we see the remainder of Tier 2. So again, these things are all statistically tied with the first 4 items in Tier 2, but they're obviously lower on the scale, ranging from 1.03, or about 72%, down to 69.4%, or 0.94 on the mean score scale. So you can see when we're at 69 and you've got a 4% error rate, we could be 65. So that would be just slightly below the 2/3 threshold. So these things, while they're very important, are just not getting us necessarily to the 2/3 level when we think about the error rate of the survey. And then the final items, maintain smaller learning groups and project-based learning, provide electives, and provide campus security, are even lower down and just aren't driving. Again, all of these things are important or we wouldn't ask about them. But they're not helping us get to that 2/3 threshold. The next 2 slides show another set of questions. Again, all of these were asked in a random order. These are informational statements. You can read that as accountability measures or positive arguments. We do the same thing, although the scale is slightly different because of the way things work on the phone. We just have a much more likely as a 2, a somewhat more likely as a 1, no effect is 0, and there's no negative side of this equation. So what that means is we can still do the same mean score, but you just can't compare these scores with that of the previous question because the scales are different. But they're still internally consistent and still great for ranking items vis-a-vis each other. So at the top of Tier 1, we have all the money raised by this measure will be controlled locally, will go to our local schools, and cannot be taken, and that ellipses means that the following words are by the state. And that is almost always either the top item or the second item. Even now that the recession is long over, it's just a critical accountability measure for these kinds of local revenue measures. That 1.34 equates to about 77% in round numbers, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure when people hear that. The measure will protect science programs, including computer science, biology, biotech, chemistry, physics, physiology, forensic, web tech design, robotics, and space tech engineering. Space tech engineering, good day to talk about that. One small step for SpaceX, I saw on CNN, one giant step for mankind. That's at second at 1.34.
Humankind.
The district is currently using $5 million a year in reserves to accommodate increased enrollment. These reserves will run out soon. Without this measure, the district will have to make cuts in academic programs, is number 3. Number 4 is the district, its enrollment is growing dramatically. By 2021-22 school year, the district's enrollment is predicted to have increased by more than 37%, but funding has remained the same, is in our 4th position. And then 5th, the measure will prevent devastating cuts to academic programs and teacher layoffs. That fifth item at 1.20 equates to about 71%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So that's at the point, again, with a 4% error rate, we could be at 66%, which is just slightly below the 2/3 threshold that we need to be at. So even the top, or in the bottom three items of tier 1, while that's our top tier, they're still not quite getting us to that 2/3 threshold.
Can you clarify then with that particular statistic why earlier we saw retain and attract good teachers that ranked so high, yet that this one you said is so low?
Well, this isn't low per se. It's just not as high
As
as we would like it
okay.
to be. And,
Okay.
and again, the two scales don't exactly line up right. But the items like prevent teacher cuts, words matter. So it's how you talk about it. So we're saying exactly what I read. The measure will prevent devastating cuts to academic programs and teacher layoffs. So it's that whole package. If we flip back to the features, what we might spend the money on when we're talking about teachers, it was attract and retain high-quality teachers. So it's focused directly on teachers. That number is clearly higher because, again, words do matter. So moving on to the second set of statements in this question, we're in Tier 2. Here at 1.12, we have the measure helps provide cutting-edge instruction, and that's about 68% in round numbers. It's above the 2/3 threshold, but again, with a 4% error rate, that could be 64. So everything on this slide, again, while critically important, is not really getting us to that 2/3 threshold that we need to be at. And in fact, by the time we get to the bottom of the list, the district has done everything it can to reduce costs. That's at 58%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measures. So that kind of message is not really helping. So at this point in the survey, we come back to our ballot questions. Again, it's exactly the same wording that we saw in the first time around. The chart gets a little more complicated because we've got both our first test and our interim test for June and for November. So the top two bars are for June, and you can see we do go from 59 to 69. That's after they've heard the features, the good things we're going to spend the money on, and they've heard the informational items, which are positive. We get a pretty good size bump. 10% is certainly substantial. But again, with error rate, 69% could be 65. And that's just below the threshold that we need to be at when we're looking at June. When we're looking at November, we're at 71.4. That could be 67.4, so that's right above, but with virtually no cushion for the November election. We do a little better there, and it does cover the error rate. And this is for the doubling the tax rate from 285. The next question is the 50% increase, so 285 plus 143. In June, we have a 4% bump because we started a little higher, as you'll remember, at 70%. We're now at 74.1. With a 4% error rate, that could be as low as 70%. And so that's a pretty good place to be. In the November election, it goes to 75.7, so a 5.6% increase with that same 4% error rate. We're in the low 70s now, and we're starting to get a cushion above the 2/3 threshold for that particular election environment for this particular question, and that's a great place to be. That doesn't mean, again, that there's no work to be done, because we still have to make sure that 29.4% stays on board, and that's a substantial undertaking in and of itself. So this is a little bit of in a vacuum because we haven't talked about any negatives yet, and we know that that's not necessarily the world that we live in. So the next set of questions is the critical statements, and these are typical negatives that you would see in this community in a ballot argument against. The methodology is the same as the informational statements. We don't put a minus sign in front of these numbers to make it seem bad. The bigger it is, the worse it is for us. So in our top tier here, we have the district is misleading taxpayers about the rate. The rate really increases automatically every year for 15 years without voter approval. If we go back and look at the actual ballot question, you'll see we have right here annual cost of living adjustments. We do have that in there, but this is a typical argument that we see in parcel tax campaigns that people make. It doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it's an argument that gets made. It's 0.73 on our mean score scale, or 4.8, 45% in round numbers, at least somewhat more likely to vote no. So that's a pretty potent argument. The fact that it doesn't have or that it does have a cost of living increase.
Okay, I'm going to slow you down. This is your area of expertise. This is not ours. And we did not have a chance to see this before tonight, so I don't really understand what you're saying here. So, I mean, I do understand the basic concept about what's the impact of negative arguments, right, on poll results. But what I'm having a hard time understanding is how to interpret, you know, what it means to say 44%, right, 44.8% with respect to argument B, the district is misleading taxpayers about the rate, et cetera. What does that mean? I don't understand. I understand that that's the most potent argument, but I don't understand how to quantify that based on the information that you're providing.
We have to get to the next question before it's really understandable. What we're trying to do here is just identify which ones are the strongest negatives versus the weakest negatives. But what we're really trying to do is get them into the mix. So when we get to the next question, which is the final ballot test, people have what we're going to spend the money on, they have the positives and they have the negatives. And just like in a real world campaign, they've got to weigh the two of those together and decide. And so here, it tells you that this is the most important negative argument that we tested. It also tells you that you should be prepared to address this if you were to put this measure on the ballot, because if it comes up, and I would predict that it will come up knowing the Marin County anti-tax groups, that's what it tells you at this point. It's a bit abstract because it's asked in a vacuum as if it were the only question.
Yeah, I understand, but what I don't understand is what that 44.8% means.
It means that 45% are more likely to oppose the measure if that's all they heard.
If that's all they heard.
Right. And that's true for all of the questions that we've asked up to this point. In the informational and features, we're asking them to look at each of those in a vacuum. It's only when we ask the ballot questions that they have to synthesize all of these different items together and then make a decision.
Okay, but given, I wasn't a respondent in this poll, right? But I mean, you're asking a series of questions of each respondent.
Right.
So how can you, how can you say or conclude that if this were the only information that a voter had, that they would be 49%, 45% less, less likely to vote in favor of it, when in fact, when you ask this question, you've asked numerous questions already of the respondent?
Yeah. For that question, I mean, that same thing is true if we go back here. Well, let's go back one more. This top item here is exactly the same situation. We're asking people to evaluate the exact wording that we've taken, and this was the cannot be taken by the state wording, and say, does that make you much more likely to support the measure, or somewhat more likely, or does it have no effect? This next question that we're talking about in terms of the misleading nature of the COLA is exactly the same thing, but we're just saying, are you much more likely to vote no, somewhat more likely to vote no, or does it have no effect on your vote? So we're directly asking them whether they would be more or less likely to support the measure in this particular wording. But it isn't, that doesn't say that we're going to lose, because all of these, because those two items that we've just looked at, the positive and the negative, the voters have to weigh those together
I get
and
it.
make a
You're
decision.
not going to allow us to lose. You and right, our consultants are not going to allow
That's
us
our
to lose.
job.
I have
That's
I have
our
the utmost confidence in that. What I'm trying to do is to sort of drill down in terms of sort of really how meaningful some of the polling is. I know it's an inexact science. Maybe you believe it is an exact science, but
It's not exact. That would be overstating it. It's an important science.
Okay.
I think this tells you exactly what you need to know when we get to the next question about your chances of being successful, because if I just stayed at this point and said, oh, you should go on the ballot, I'd be misleading you, because you're not going to get 76% in all likelihood, because we don't live in this world where there's only positive information. We live in the world I'll show you in one moment as soon as I finish the rest of this slide. And the second item is people in Marin are paying county sales tax increases, transportation, parks and open space, community college bond measures, high school and elementary bond measures, your measures and the elementary measures. Some are on the ballot right now. And this is on top of that, and it's just too much. And that's a 0.61 or 40% in round numbers, at least somewhat more likely to oppose the measure. So you have two items that are pretty strong, should be prepared to answer that question in the context of putting these measures on the ballot. We also asked a couple items that are in Tier 2 that are below the 1/3 threshold that would be necessary to defeat a measure, so they're still impactful from a negative perspective, but they're not as impactful as the top two. That includes the Trump tax plan is making things worse by limiting mortgage deductions and deductions for state and local taxes. Regardless of whether this measure is a good idea or not, we just can't afford it right now. I think that's an interesting argument that we've been asking everywhere since January and since the tax bill passed. We've seen it actually be somewhat higher than this in other places. So that I thought was surprising given this particular community, but it's also important information. And then finally, Marin County is planning on increasing taxes for transportation, parks, and open space. We can't afford a local tax too. It's unlikely that both of those will be on the ballot. In fact, it appears that the park and open space measure is not going to happen this year. That's a renewal that may happen in the future. The transportation measure for TAM, it's not clear at this point whether that's going to be on the ballot or not, but it still could be. So this question was designed to throw out there into the mix that there might be another sales tax on the ballot at the same time. So now we've given them positives and negatives, and we come back to our ballot question the last time, and again, we're forcing them to now synthesize all that information. They have to first decide whether they believe all that information or one part of that information is true or not, and then they have to compare that with the other side and decide where they are on this particular question. There's nobody in the survey to tell them what's true or not. There's nobody to tell people in the voting booth what's true or not. They have to evaluate that on their own. So this particular slide again shows the 285 plus 285 measure for 15 years. In our June tests, we started at 59%, we bumped up to 69, but now after we've heard the negatives, we're back down to 62.5. So obviously that's a problem. If you average the middle test and the final test because of the positioning of the positives and the negatives, you still don't get to 2/3. For November, we're at 64.8, 65 in round numbers, so we've gone back down again in the November universe for the doubling the tax rate. If you average the two again, we're just barely at the 2/3 threshold, and there's no cushion on that one. If we look at the other side of the coin, or the 50% increase, $143 increase, in the June environment, we're up a little from our first test. We're at 71% in round numbers with a 4% error rate. That could be 67, which is just a little bit above the 66.7% that we need to be successful. If we look at the November version of the question, we're at 73%. So now with a 4% error rate, we could be at 69. So we've picked up another percent in terms of the error rate, 1.5%. So that gives us a little bit more cushion. If we average the two of those with the middle test, again, because of the positioning of the negatives and the positives. For the June environment, with the error rate, we're at really 68.5%, so not much cushion. For the November, with the error rate, we're at 70%, so we have a little bit more cushion in November. So you're probably seeing where I'm going. November, for a 50% increase, is probably where we should be focused, because it's the only place that we have a cushion on top of our error rate in the survey. The next couple slides show some fallbacks where we said, well, what if it's 12 years instead of 15, or what if it's 9 years instead of 15? And for the November election, it just didn't matter. We're not getting this a bump that we'd like to see. That's not atypical, though, because the duration at the end of the day isn't really what drives people's support or opposition on this kind of measure. It's about the rate and what they're going to get. If we look at it in June, we see the same thing. There's just really not much difference there, so making it shorter doesn't seem to be a good idea, given that we do have an option which passes at above the 2/3 threshold in the November environment for the 50% increase. We also had a fallback that took the cost of living adjustment out, and where there is some help in doing this, it doesn't really exceed where we were for the 50% increase in the November election. So my takeaway was, why would we want to give this up? Because we don't have to if we put a 50% increase on the November ballot, where we're getting higher than this on the final test. So in summary, there is a very solid base of support for a 50% parcel tax increase. It should be in the November election, and the two sub-bullets there just summarize the vote there in terms of those two options. The top features include the things we talked about: high-quality science, technology, engineering, math, reading, writing, instruction, attracting and retaining high-quality teachers, hands-on science. The top informational items are all the money will be controlled locally and can't go to the state or can't be taken by the state. The measure will protect science programs, including the whole long list, and the district is currently using $5 million a year in reserves to accommodate increased enrollment. We would have core academic program losses and teacher losses if we were not to pass this measure. Those are the top informational items. All of that comes down to the conclusion that I've already expressed, which is, given the findings and the 2/3 requirement, we think that the district should continue the process to prepare for a November 2018 election, not a June, because of the numbers for both. So that's what I have for this evening. I'm happy to answer any more questions you might have.
So why don't we open it up to the board members first, and student trustees, and then, so I don't forget, public comment, and I see Ms. Willard in the audience. But I want to give everyone a chance. Any board member would like to go first? I get the sense you'd like to go first. I get the sense you're ready. Yeah, sorry.
With respect to the recommendation for, there we go. With respect to the recommendation for the November over the June 2018 election, is that based solely on the differential between 70.9% and 73%, or are there other considerations?
It's the consistency of that separation. It's also, I think it does have some impact that it gives you more time to prepare for it. And there's, as I mentioned earlier, there is that probable yes, which we include historically as our way of determining feasibility, but you have a lot of work to do to keep those people on board. So that's part of it. We have very short time between now and June, and I don't think there's enough time to move those numbers up that we'd need to move up.
Okay.
Where we're at.
I'm just going to let you all dive in.
I've been asking questions, but I have a couple more. The way that you've phrased the questions, I'm assuming that these are phrased in a way that you believe would be approved, by the county elections department for purposes of what would appear potentially on the
We
ballot.
had your legal counsel approve them before we did the survey.
Okay, I'm sure we have excellent lawyers. What about, well, the obvious question, but what's interesting about the way that you asked the question is the question doesn't ask for, would you approve a 50% increase, right? The question asks, would you approve a particular dollar increase? And you're allowing the voter to infer, right, that it is in fact a 50% increase. But I wonder, to what extent is it a function of the fact that there's a right, it's in the $400 as opposed to it's over, $500 or $600, whatever the figure is. And the reason, obviously, I'm going here is because there's a whole lot of distance between 50% and 100% increase.
What you're referring to is what we call psychological ceilings. And so there is a psychological ceiling at $499.95. And we only need to go to Target to see that played out in every product that's priced. Everything is $9.99, $19.99, not $10 and $20, and that applies all the way up the scale. That is certainly part of the issue here. The way we have worded it, well, I said doubling and 50%, I was doing that for convenience sake in the presentation. The way we have it in the actual ballot questions is the way AB 195, which is state law that was approved in last year and went into effect on January 1st, says we have to. And that's one of the reasons. We've always had your council approve ballot questions because we don't want to test something that does great and then have them change it all up on us. But actually it was AB 809 that was originally passed in 2015, which said we had to have three things. We had to have the tax rate, we had to have the sunset, and we had to have how much it raises per year, all of which you see in that question. Where it gets tricky is how you talk about the increase. If we were to, in full disclosure, we're taking it apart and saying you're passing a $285 renewal and a $143 increase, rather than conflating the two of you.
Yeah, no, I get the nuance there. But I'm going to come back to this question, right? Because as a board, we're going to have to decide, how, to quote one of our past, very effective foundation heads, we're going to have to decide how aspirationally we want to think about, think about this. And so, you've said 50%, the polling results with respect to a 50% increase, right? $428 parcel tax plus annual increases. It looks, the polling results look favorable. And you have suggested that there is substantially more risk, right, at the higher rate. And so, again, the question I have is, in your judgment, if we were to pick a number in between the two, but does not exceed that magic target 499.99, what's your judgment on that?
Well, I think that it's more complicated than just the 499. I think there are also psychological ceilings for the increase amount. So 143 has a psychological ceiling at 149.95. That's probably a major psychological ceiling because it's crossing over the 150 amount. There are smaller psychological ceilings at 69, 79, 89, and then another big one at 99, where we go from 199 to 200. You certainly can't do that. I would, given the margins of error and that we're not really that much higher, and like I said, we're at 70% when we average the middle and the final test, and with a 4% error rate, that's a decent place to be, but it's not a huge cushion. It's only a 3-point cushion from where we have to be successful. So I'd be hesitant to say you should increase that, because if you increase it, we're going to cross over a major threshold, even if you increase it $5, or no, I'm sorry, not $5. If you increase it $8, you're going to cross that $150 threshold. So I don't think I would do that.
Okay.
If you want to do 149, that's probably fine.
So, of necessity, right, the discussion that we're having tonight is focused on polling results and our ability to win, if you will, right, to succeed with respect to this. But you have not been part of, all the discussions that we as a board are having on the other side of this equation, which is looking at our budget, looking at looking at the impact of enrollment growth going forward on our budget, the fact that we're deficit spending, and projecting how much money we need which needs to be taken into account, as well as, what are the challenges from an electoral basis. So that's why we had a very sobering discussion at a meeting last week where we talked about where we have, our deficits are, we're facing some serious questions with respect to reduction in spending. And so, I think it's our job to push you a little bit on this, right? I'm sure you don't like to be wrong, right? And making your predictions, but truly, we need to be thinking as holistically as we can about this. And so,
I think that my response, because I've been asked that question in a lot of districts, one, I think that we cross over the 150 threshold, that's a problem. I go back to this slide. Our best number for the final test is 65% for the higher amount. If you do this and get 65%, you don't get 65% of the money, you get 0. So that's why I would stay here.
Right, but again, that's a binary choice, and what I'm trying to figure out is where
Yeah, and
the
I don't
line
think
is in
there's
between.
a midpoint where you could be successful, because you very quickly cross that $150 threshold of the increase amount.
Even if they had additional information in some of your informational points, for instance, what we've learned more recently is not only the extent of reductions that would be required, that it really would have a pretty drastic impact, and also what we're hearing is there really isn't maybe enough in the long term. I mean, if they had that information, would it sway them, do you think?
They do have that information in the survey. The voters as a whole don't yet have it. But the third best argument in favor is the district is currently using $5 million a year in reserves to accommodate increased enrollment. These reserves will soon run out. In this measure, the district will have to make cuts in core academic programs and teachers. So in a general way, we've described that. I would argue that getting into the details
Getting the detail would not help.
gonna work.
Okay, thank you. That's
high
what I
level,
wondered. Okay.
It's helping.
Yeah,
But it's
okay.
already baked into these numbers.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I have a question on this slide. I'm looking at that probably yes segment of each of those bar graphs. And if you look at the November final test and the June final test, it's interesting to me that the June final test probably yes number is lower than the November final test number. And also the definitely yes in June is higher than the definitely yes in November final test. So I'm thinking about what you just said, that we really have to look at that probably yes population and get them. We've got the green guys on the left. It's that next segment that we really need to focus on. And, timing is of the essence for us. The difference between a June parcel tax and a November parcel tax is $5 million. And so I'm wondering if, given that, we've got 71% in June and 73% in November, with fewer people in that segment in November or in June to win over. We have to win over more people in November than we do in June.
I wouldn't say win over. I would say keep on board.
Keep on board.
But it is true, it's bigger. I mean, what's true about all of these numbers, unfortunately, whether it's the aggregate 71 or 73 or the the splits within it, they're all within the error margin of error. So they could be reversed. It could be 73 in June and 71 in November. Based on my experience and what we talked about earlier on in terms of the turnout and the younger nature of the November turnout versus June, I think this is probably accurate. But statistically speaking, there is technically no difference. That's true among the probably yeses as well. There is work to be done in both cases, and how that work needs to be done. Your consultant can talk about it. I think has a presentation to address that as well.
But you still firmly recommend a November 50% bump, 15-year term COLA.
With the COLA, right.
So on the ballot, would the idea that it would be the total figure of $428, does that appear on the ballot?
No.
Really?
And again, this has been vetted based on AB 809 and AB 195 by your council, and we are legally approved with this language. Now, speaking of the language, there is something I would do instantly. The first two bullets I would reverse, because we saw that the STEM and reading and writing bullet was more important than the high quality teachers. They're both very important, no question about that, but you know, if I'm looking for every shade I can find, that's what I'm going to do.
Maybe this is for the political. Are we going to hear from Jill
Yes,
as well?
they'll be next. So, student trustees, do you have any questions at this point? Well, give us a holler if you do as we move forward. So now why don't we open it up to public comment, and then we'll come back to the board if we have any further clarification after public comment. So Mr. Gabi, if you could stay in the house, that would be great. Thanks. So do we have any public comment on this agenda item? I see Mimi Willard coming to the podium.
So, first of all, I respectfully think that despite the polling, that I don't know what escalator is being thought about here, but a 15-year parcel tax with an escalator, I predict is going to be a problem for you. Because the first thing that will happen is that somebody's going to hit the calculator, do the compound growth rate on it, and figure out what the terminal year is. And you go all the way to 15 years, and you're getting to a big number. I didn't have time enough to hit it 15 times on my phone calculator. And that's evident right now in Kentfield, where there's a lot of buzz about the fact that by the time they get to year 10, they're going to be close to $2,000 parcel tax. A 15-year has not been tried in California. Certainly since 2008, according to the Ballotopedia numbers that I saw yesterday, so you would be an outlier. The highest has been 12, and I think that's 2, don't hold me to it, one of which was Mill Valley. And as you know, that just squeaked through. It's also going to be very sensitive to what your escalator is. 5% is a lot harder to get done than 3%. So that would be the main thing that I have to say. The other thing is that, as I talked about the last time I was here last week, unfortunately, even if you got the 100%, it wasn't going to completely solve your deficit problem. It would get you back up to your necessary reserve levels, but you'd still be accumulating deficit. So obviously you're going to have to make a very strong message about the financial necessity of this, but you're also going to have to, I think, be pursuing a two-pronged approach here, which is also going to complicate your messaging regarding cutbacks and layoffs and preserving all your programs. Don't shoot the messenger. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Any additional clarifying questions from the board or student trustees as a result of the most recent public comment?
What's an escalator, like, in regards to the parcel tax?
Who would like to answer that? I think Mr. Godby will answer that for
we
us.
can-
I think
we can
answer it.
Cost of living increase. So every year, say your escalator is 5%. So this year, it would be $428. Next year, it would be $428 plus 5%. And then the year after, you add the 5% to what it was the previous year. So it compounds.
Okay.
And can get really high.
And what's our escalator now? Isn't it 3?
3.
3%, yeah. Sarah?
Follow-up question. If there was like a recession, would the escalator go down?
Not if it's a fixed number.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And I would add to that, I encourage most of my clients to make it the cost of living in the region to address that particular question. You don't want to say it's going to be 5% in perpetuity and we all remember the recession. And it's hard to justify a 5% increase, I'm just picking that number out of the air, in 2010. And people remember that. So I think you have to be a little more flexible about that. You can say cost of living with a cap of some sort of thing, but you don't want it to continually go up if the economy's not going up.
So you didn't, the polling didn't test 3% or 5%, it just says cost of living adjustments.
Right. And again, that's vetted legally, so it's something you can do. Now, what you have to do, if you use that wording that we have here, you'll have a full text of the measure, which will have to spell out exactly what your intention is. You don't get to just say that. You're going to have to be specific, but it won't be in the actual ballot question, the 75-word statement. And the reason for that is virtually, I'm not an attorney, but virtually every attorney I've worked with has always said the 75-word statement is a summary. You can't put your entire measure in 75 words. Just can't be done. That's sometimes pages and pages, which will have details like we're talking about, and that's the appropriate place for it. But you have to summarize what you're going to do in 75 words, and that's why we have just the annual cost of living increase or adjustment.
But if we picked a fixed annual rate of increase, let's say 3% for the sake of discussion, as a proxy for these annual cost of living adjustments, would that 3% figure have to appear in this summary?
No. No, it would have to be in the full text.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a clarifying question for you. I don't have the scope of work for the contract that we have with you, and I'm just wondering, now that the poll is done and you've shared with us the results, what we can expect from Godby, are you done with
I'm
us?
essentially done at this stage in the process. I'm certainly available to answer questions as long as you have them, as well as answer questions that your consultant might have, as long as they may have them too. But in terms of our work project, we're essentially done.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you.
Thank you. And since you're essentially done, do you mind staying a little bit longer?
Sure.
My thought being is when we have the political consultant speak next, there's apt to be a question, and it would probably be, so thank you, I appreciate that. So thank you, Mr. Godby, it's very, very helpful. We'll move now.
Just a real quick clarifying
Yes.
comment. In regards to the sizing of the parcel tax, a clarification should be made. The doubling of the parcel tax would bring in at least an additional $10 million in revenue. We currently collect around $10 million, and so a doubling would double that amount. As the board recalls from the last meeting, the structural deficit is on the order of $6 million. So I believe the correction should be made that should a doubling of the parcel tax pass under the current fiscal outlook, that would not necessitate further reductions in the budget. There would be a surplus there to address other needs if it is in fact doubled. We've fact-checked that and verified that. So again. And that was actually when you get into the language, you see that somewhere as well. The expected revenue increase exceeds our structural deficit on a doubling. We didn't look at where the break-even point. The mid range at 5 million with a 6 million deficit. Simple math is about $1 million still below. Still a structural deficit of $1 million.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshihara. So now we're ready for the next presenter, the Whitehurst Mosier update and stakeholder outreach. Miss, Golub? Did I pronounce your name right? Great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you all tonight. I know there's probably a lot of questions. I threw together, I wanted to update the board just on everything that we've been doing, and then I spoke to Mr. Yoshihara earlier today, and I know that there's going to be a lot of questions on June versus November, so I threw up a slide on that as well, but happy to run through this pretty quickly and then answer any questions that everybody has, given that a lot of new information has been given tonight. So just generally, as an update of everything that we've been working on as a team with the superintendent and some of the board members, there was the earlier analysis of the parcel tax ranges to determine what we wanted to test. We spent a lot of time we did the electoral review to also help determine what we were going to test, what elections we were going to test. We published an initial statement, as everybody knows, on the school website and sent it out through the school networks about the enrollment growth and the financial challenges that the district was facing. We did the electoral review. We conducted the stakeholder outreach, which I'll review a bit in my presentation, but you received a full memo outlining the responses we received from the stakeholder outreach. We worked with staff and the board and Brian Gobby to draft the poll and then to help and analyze the results of it. We've also been working with district staff to produce a new webpage on the school site that has a lot of relevant information, so not only about enrollment growth, but the district's finances, explains sort of community funding for the school district and why, sort of we're in the place that we are now. And it includes a feedback tool for members of the public who want to weigh in and let the board know what they think about this current situation. After some of the stakeholder outreach results, I think there's some information we should think about adding to that, but I'm happy to weigh in on that later. As you know, the board conducted 18 meetings with stakeholders both in the district and the community over the last few months. The good news is that the stakeholder outreach reflects what we saw in the polling, which is most approve of the district. There's a lot of wonderful things that the district is doing that the stakeholders appreciate, the innovation from the board level all the way down, the wide range of class offerings. There was a lot of people who talked about counseling services and the wellness programs, and then obviously the quality of the staff and teachers that came out in a lot of the interviews that were held. And then, as mentioned earlier, the overall transparency of the district was something that came up in a lot of the interviews. Some of the negatives that were highlighted by some of the stakeholders were the classroom sharing, which I'm sure came as no surprise. Some cited that we could improve communication with neighbors and residents. More than a few people mentioned the facilities planning process. And then what came up a couple of times and what I think we should consider adding to some of our material that's on the website is, how does it work when students are enrolled? What process does the district go through to ensure that enrolled students live in the district? So I think that's something easy that we can tackle in the next few weeks. Other good news was that an overwhelming majority of the people interviewed supported increased revenue, and about half of those who supported increased revenue also advocated for increased cuts. And then in how the district could be successful and increase revenue, a lot of the respondents said more communication, clearly outlining the needs of the district, which we've started. I hope we've started to do, but continuing that and putting it in sort of in relatable terms, and then continuing the district's great work on transparency and doing more to engage the community on a broader level. So it was all overall very positive. Next steps are, we've been continuing to engage the public, so sending out emails that through different channels, that explain the current financial situation the district's in, and asking people to either come to a board meeting or to give feedback on the website. We will continue to do that and report back in March on the findings from that. At some point, the board will need to direct the staff and us to prepare a ballot measure when the board decides what and when, so that we will be able to prepare all of the material you will need to go to the ballot before our work here is done. That's something we will definitely leave for you. And then I think some of the things that the district may need to do post our work is engaging with the news and local media. That actually came out in our stakeholder outreach as well. There's clearly a very clear narrative that the district has that should be shared with some of the opinion leaders and press. And then, as even Brian cited, there's public education in advance of the measure. The district can't advocate for the measure, but the district can educate the public on what a potential measure would do and why it was placed. And then, just as a reminder, not that everyone needs reminding, but these are the dates by which the board would need to place a measure for the June election and the November election. So as you think through the June versus November quandary, it's basically it would be 2 board meetings from now that the board would need to vote to place the measure for June. And then, excuse me if there was anything, I did this pretty quickly earlier today because I wanted to make sure to address some of the comments and concerns you might have in advance, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously, a June election means additional revenue earlier, and I know that's the top concern of the board right now. As Brian outlined, we're not as likely to win in June based on polling. So we have to seriously consider that because I think, as Brian said, we could end up with no money after the June election, and that would probably be worse in a lot of situations. It is a less crowded ballot. We would have less time to educate and prepare for the ballot, so that means less time for the district to prepare the ballot measure, the ballot arguments, and then less time to educate, and less time for any outside interests who wanted to help, communicate about the measure. There will be Regional Measure 3 on the June ballot. As the polling showed that there's not a significant impact of other items on the ballot, but it is something to think about. And then just the sheer time of getting up and running, the private campaign would need just much more resources, not only because there's less time, but because we would, as Brian outlined, we would need to do a lot more work to win in June.
Sorry, Jill, what is Regional Measure 3?
Regional Measure 3 is the bridge toll measure. So all Bay Area counties will be voting on a $3 increase on all Bay Area bridges and tolls.
And why is a less crowded ballot, why are a less crowded ballot and a more crowded ballot both positives? Is that intent?
No, sorry, that was my, I did apologize in advance. I literally did this at 5 o'clock because I wanted to make sure to give you something, but that would be a negative on the November side.
More crowded ballot.
Correct.
Because our message gets lost?
You have to compete for mailbox space. You have to compete against other tax measures. As much as people in the poll say that the other measures on the ballot don't impact them that much, you still have to you're going to have to get through other taxes to get to our tax. So if there's a countywide tax, statewide tax measures, any voter voting on the ballot has to go through those before they get to ours, and it makes it a little bit harder.
I recall some information about the cost per voter that the district would have to provide. So I can't recall what those numbers are, but when I saw the June, and at that point I thought it was $2 per voter, as opposed to November where it seemed to me significantly higher, cost.
Actually, you remembered it perfectly. It's $2 a voter in June, about $2 a voter per June and November. It's the special mail-in elections that are extremely higher.
Thank you.
I have a question, Jill, and that is if the board decides to go out for a June parcel tax and it fails, is it feasible? Have you seen districts try to go out then again in November, or is there just too much burnout?
No, I have not seen it done. I would not recommend it. I think the amount, you basically, you burn your resources, you burn your support in the community, and usually when you go up for a measure and it fails, the community wants to see you do something different, right? To be responsive to the community, to say, you know, we're going to change the measure this way, we're going to change what we were going to spend the money on, and hope that the voters see the difference here, and you just wouldn't have enough time. But also you would just be much more likely to lose in November.
Thank you.
So I'll just, to finish it off, you know, obviously November postpones the revenue, but we're much more likely to win based on the polling. It is a more crowded ballot, which, my apologies, should be a negative, or at least we think it will be a more crowded ballot. The district will have more time to educate and prepare for the election. We will be competing with a statewide recall of the gas tax, which could in some scenario create a negative voter atmosphere. As Brian pointed out, increased turnout, so younger voters who are more likely to be supportive of tax measures. And then, as we've discussed before, and I put this on here because I assumed someone would bring it up, but there will be board elections in November. Given that, you know, if we went in November at 50%, we're polling above 70%. That's a very comfortable place for you to be, and I would be surprised if someone ran for the board opposed to something that was 70% popular, right? So, you know, you need a certain percentage of vote to get elected to the board, and running against something that's 70+% popular wouldn't be wise. I don't think that this is a significant factor, but it could be on there as a negative, something that sort of adds to the general atmosphere of what's going on in the district.
Would it be a positive then if all 3 board members were to go up for re-election?
Yes. Yes.
Can you say that one more time? I'm not sure I heard you. Yeah. Okay,
Yes,
good clarification.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I think another consideration, you know, with it, you know, as much as I'd like to have the money now in June, we have a school to run, and preparation for an election will take up a lot of staff time, particularly our senior staff, our superintendent, our assistant superintendents. And with a school to run and all of this compressed into a short time period, I wonder, you know, what the effect would be on on our educational programs of trying to jam it in. But then again, having that money early would have a very profound effect on our education programs too.
I see people leaning forward. Go for it.
You want to ask some questions first?
No, I was leaning around Chuck to see if you were going forward.
Okay, Jill, so I'm going to ask you the same, you know, sort of set of questions, or really question that I was asking before, which is we've tested the 50% increase, we've tested the 100% increase, or the doubling. You know, we're faced with some pretty significant, you know, budget deficits looking out over the next several years. And so the question is there room in between, and sort of where is that inflection point where and if there is, where would that be, and where's the inflection point where in your judgment the risk, you know, outweighs, you know, the potential reward?
No, I don't think that there's a midpoint that's safe, right? So as a board, you might decide to risk it and go for, you know, more money than like an in-between amount or 100% increase. But it is our recommendation that you go for what you can get, what you have the best shot of getting, because getting a 50% increase in November is better than getting nothing this year. So my strong recommendation is to back up what Brian said, and what actually comes through in all of our public outreach and all of our stakeholder engagement, which is a reasonable increase combined with some level of cuts, even though obviously that hurts significantly.
But the polling didn't test the middle ground.
But the number on the 50%, the number on the 50% increase is not a slam dunk number. It's not. If you were polling if we were after positives and negatives, or we were averaging mid to high 70s, that would be a different situation. But what we're saying based on our experience and what Brian is saying based on his is that's your best shot at winning, and that's not even a guarantee. So I don't think that there is wiggle room there. It just gets riskier and riskier. Does that answer your question?
Do I have to like your answer?
No, I'm sorry. I'll be the bad guy.
But you know, we've, I mean, I use that phrase, sort of thinking aspirationally on purpose, because we've had folks. This is a very supportive community, and we've had parents who've been very involved and contributed a lot to our schools really challenge us as a board to think aspirationally, including with respect to setting high targets for fundraising. And, you know, that came up a lot. We had some very detailed, as some particular people in the audience here will know, very detailed and somewhat exhaustive discussions about wellness centers. And there were significant costs. You know, the cost of those was a significant component of the discussion. And it was in that context that we were challenged to sort of think aspirationally. And so that's really why I'm kind of pushing you, right? I mean, you're the expert on this. But when we look at the size of our deficits, which don't take into account at this stage any increases in compensation to our staff, you know, over the next 3 years, which is when we projected, it's really challenging for us. And so, you know, the difference conceivably of another, you know, $1 million a year, which would increase, you know, another 3% per year, that could be, you know, in terms of cutting programs and that kind of thing, it could make a difference for us. You know, so it's a big issue.
I don't, you know, I feel for all of you. I understand. It's easy for me to sit here and say, you know, looking at the polling and the public outreach is what I think you should do. You have to, you know, you have to make those cuts, and that's a very difficult position to be in. But it would be malpractice for me to tell you that you could get something that you can't. And I think you would be in a much better position if you win in November than if you try for something that you can't get and then end up with nothing at the end of the year. I wish I could tell you otherwise. I mean, to be clear, you're actually in a very, these are good numbers. A 50% increase is a big increase, and you're in a very good, and you know, the public is very supportive of the district and thinks you're doing a great job. There's a lot of good news in here. I know that's hard to see.
So we're at 73%, right? That's you know, plus or minus 4%, right? For the November informed figure. So you're saying we'd have to be higher than that before you would say, you know, add another $35 to the increase or whatever it is. I mean, that's what I'm pushing you on this here because these are big issues for us.
You're saying another $35 a year is another $1 million?
Well, I don't know whether that'd be another $1 million. We'd have to do that. We'd have to do the math, right? But I'm trying to see, you know, to what extent we could push the envelope and to what extent it would increase the risk of electoral defeat. And so you had said in your response, right, you were looking at the figures and you had said if we were in the mid-70s, whatever that means, right, maybe the answer would be a little bit different. So we're at 73%.
Backing up, right, the poll tests the ballot question as if someone walked in or pulled their ballot and had no other information other than the ballot question. Then we test what would be, in my opinion, an extremely well-funded positive campaign. And then we test a funded negative campaign. And then we end up at 73. So I just want you to keep in mind that that 73% supposes a fully funded campaign in which every voter gets all of this information, and it's just not extremely likely. So I would, it is a 73 at the end of the day, plus or minus, but it as an uninformed, you start at 70, that makes me much more comfortable.
I didn't understand the last thing that you said.
You're with an uninformed voter, you're
Yeah.
starting at 70% with a 50% threshold.
Okay.
I just like that number better.
But you still have the 5% error rate that captures that, correct?
4%.
Or 4%?
four.
Is it 4 or 5? So 4% error rate would capture that, whether it's informed or not informed, because that's based on your experience, right? Over years of.
3.73 for November.
Okay.
Yeah, the error rate is specific to the
To this
sample size and this
sample size.
university.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
so it's
Okay.
exact.
Okay. Okay. So I think I'd like to move to public comment and then come back if another piece of information sparks some clarification. What, Barbara? Oh, okay. Do we have any public comment? Do you have a wonder? Is that what you said? Okay, I'm sorry, Dr. Yoshihara.
I have a wonder with regards to the work that has been done from some of our feeders recently, particularly with Mill Valley. And so Mill Valley, as we know, narrowly passed. I don't know what their early polling showed and how far out they were. Kentfield went out in an election and then is considering or is doing, from what I gather, a mail-in with language that I'm told is pretty similar. Lagunitas, I believe, went out on a mail-in with a really short time frame, what I look like a very short time frame. And now Dixie is going out on a mail-in in May, which is again is a short time frame from sort of from when that was. So when we're discussing sort of time frame and length of time frame, I'm seeing some of our feeders go out on relatively short time frames, and so these wonders around. Where were some of these in terms of their initial polling? If a measure is not successful, it's interesting that Kentfield is going out again in a relatively short amount of time with language that's pretty similar as well. So I'm sure we'll watch these as they unfold, but those are the wonders. Like, I see these happening.
We did the surveys for Kentfield and for Dixie, and I don't have the numbers with me, so
Right.
I could get those for you. But I think the important point is what perceived to be a short period of time now, we did the Kentfield survey last summer. Okay. So it's not really a short period of time. They've been working on this since they got the polling numbers in September of last year for this year. Dixie was in the field even before Kentfield. So it is not a short period of time for either of those two districts. They've been at this for quite some time.
Okay.
I
Thank
can't tell
you.
you about Lagunitas.
Great, thank you. I'd like to propose something. I have a request for a bio break. I think that would be a good idea, so long as we do it very quickly. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. Can I
I'm
just,
sorry.
before we close this one?
Yes.
I am currently meeting with Jill, as is Dr. Yoshihara, and I'm thinking as we're heading into the nitty-gritty of what we're going to do, it might be helpful to have another trustee sitting with me and our consultant and our superintendent, and I'm wondering if the rest of the board thinks that would be okay, and if so, who might want to meet with me?
Well, I met with you last time. I'm happy to keep going if somebody else has the time to do it, and if someone else does not have the time to do it. I'm not saying that right.
Yeah.
But you all know what I meant.
I mean, I think it's valuable to have the board president sitting there because then you know what's happening. So, I don't know. It's not something we could just do without asking the rest of the board if you're okay with that.
Could we take some, oops. Could we take something off your plate?
Oh, no, I'm fine. No, I can handle
I
it.
agree. I think it's so consequential in our communications with each other. And so.
And we'll work towards a way to communicate with the board without violating the Brown Act in a way that's routine and consistent, and timing-wise, getting material to the board earlier before board meetings and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm happy to do it. And then, oh, no, absolutely. So now to more important things. Someone requested a bio break. And no, it was that's rude. In any event, why don't we do it quickly? Because wellness deserves our, attention, and it's we're all looking forward to hearing wellness. And it is 8:35, and they've been patiently waiting. I want to say goodbye to Mr. Godby and Miss Gullip. I think I said it wrong, but thank you very, very much. We'll be talking to you again, but hold that thought. Did you change your mind? Would you like to make a public comment? Okay, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. We are going to get a public comment after all from Mimi Willard.
The bio break. My public comment's actually very brief. I would just like to suggest to you on a going forward basis that, with backdrop here being that I would give you guys like an A for transparency. This board has just done a fabulous job in terms of the video and the minutes and the accessibility, etc. The only thing that I would ding it is that this is not the first time that you've had consultant presentation that was not given to the board or the public in advance. And I could see from Michael Futterman's questions that it would have been really helpful to the board had you been given that in advance. So I think that that's something that you should insist upon, and we within the community should also be insisting upon, because we pay for it and we use that information. So I hope that that will be a procedure that we won't see again in the future, and I've seen the same thing over in Kent Fields. So I don't know if it's how they operate. I don't know, but you're in charge.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll add that to our list of consideration. Thank you so much. So now we'll take a quick break and be ready for wellness. And while we're taking a break, Dr. Yoshihara and I will discuss if we can take something else off the calendar. Waiting, I know that's tiring, but I think we've refreshed a little bit now and ready to give the attention that we want to give to this important presentation. So thank you. And I think Dr. Yoshihara and I spent some time, he looked at it. We're going to remove a lot of the items after you, so don't feel like we're going to be wanting you to hurry just because we want to get to the next agenda item. So thank you.
You're welcome. Is that on?
You have to be closer, though.
I have to be closer. Okay. Well, thank you for having us up here again. This is the program evaluation update that we've promised you based on evaluation data from close to 18 months of school time. The 14-15, correct? 14-15 and 15-16. 15-16 and 16-17 school years. So a semester of the 15-16 and then the 16-17 school year. And so Jessica and I are going to do a very quick presentation / reminder of what wellness is and what it does, how it intersects with school life here in TUHSD. And then we're going to turn it over to our evaluator, Dr. John Shields from Evaluation Training and Research. So our mission, we've all seen this before. This is what we worked on with various stakeholder groups and our wellness advisory board to support the health, well-being, self-advocacy, and educational outcomes of all students, and in doing so, enhance the delivery of coordinated health, mental health, substance abuse use, and sexual health services through a continuum of prevention and intervention programming and services in the schools.
Over the years, everyone asks what wellness does, and the easiest way to boil it down is in this document, which is that we coordinate, implement, and evaluate programs and services, including both direct services, so like one-to-one group care for students, as well as prevention and education for students, staff, and parents. And the focus areas of our program are health, mental health, substance use and abuse, and we actually call it sexual health to be inclusive rather than reproductive health. This is an old slide. So that's kind of the easiest way to think about our work. And the direct student services takes a lot of our time and is critical. We want to make sure students are getting the care that they need, and we also work really hard to do school-wide events and classroom presentations and education in and outside of the classroom.
And this is a very brief timeline of wellness. So we did program research in 13-14. In 14-15, we did needs assessment and planning for the program. Then in 15-16, second semester, we launched the Redwood Wellness Center, followed in the fall of 16-17 by the launch of the Drake Wellness Center, or actually in the spring, yeah, in the spring, and then launched the TAM wellness program this year.
So a lot of Dr. Shields' presentation will be focusing on the direct services we provide and the health education and prevention. So we were just going to highlight our community partnerships, our youth development work, and our drop-in space for you all. So one of the things that we're really proud of and we think is going really well is our community partnerships. So these are all the logos of the different community organizations that we now partner with to provide support services to students. BACR existed before we came, but the rest of the partnerships are new, and we feel excited because students are working with community providers in the schools and are then being able to seek support in their community when school is closed. And we're making great connections and building our programs. And through this, we have been able to secure over 125 hours a week of free services. So that is across the schools. We have all kinds of free hours that we're getting through these different MOUs that you guys have all seen. And we honestly have different community organizations knocking on our door every day. So that is exciting, and it's also a big process to bring a community organization on campus. We need to make sure that they align with our mission and that they're able and ready to serve students and that there's a need for them. So we're really being particular about what types of community organizations we're partnering with and making sure that they reflect the student body. And one thing we're really proud of is diversifying the providers that we have available for students. So we always kind of had one type of provider, and now we have providers who reflect some of the diversity of our students. So students like LGBTQ students can be served by the SPAR Center. Our Marin City kids are being served through the Marin City Health and Wellness Center partnership, so that's exciting. So those are our different partnerships and more to come. And another big part of our program is our youth development work, which is one of my favorite parts of the program. So sorry that the slides are not all coming out quite right, but so the two ways that we make sure that there's youth voice and choice in our program is one through our peer resource partnership and two through wellness student advisories that we have at each school now. TAM is they just selected their students. So peer resource partnership, we are actually spending about 90 minutes a week in that class with peer resource teachers, helping bring in education and then working with the students so that they can then go out and educate other students. At Drake right now, we're restructuring peer resource, and we have one of our partners, Inside Circle, comes into peer resource every week at Drake, and they're going to be starting at TAM. So we really partner, we do workshops and educate the students first, and then we figure out what kinds of activities and events we want to plan with students. So right now we're doing marijuana education around the legalization of marijuana, and yesterday we had 4 workshops in 4 different peer resource classes to teach students about marijuana. We're bringing in another group of presenters next week, and then we're going to go back and actually do planning around doing a campaign to educate their peers. So we do the education first and then the planning and events and resourcing with their other peers after. So that's our peer resource partnership, and then our wellness student advisory has been really successful at each school. We have a group of students who apply And we then select students to serve on our advisory, and we do a combination of community building with them, education around health and wellness topics. They advise us, which is my favorite part. They tell us what they like and they don't like, and we make changes to our program based on their advice. And then we do program planning. So students and their voice are really the key foundation to our program, and a lot of our work has changed through the student voice and what they want our program to look like. Here's just pictures of the spaces. The other piece that we wanted to mention was the actual wellness center. This is Redwood. Each one's a little different. All of the design of the wellness centers have been with students, so that's exciting. We actually had a design team of students at Drake, and so when they come in, it's their artwork and it's their vision, and they are very comfortable in these spaces. So that's Redwood. This is Drake, and TAM is coming along. We're just starting with TAM. We're still waiting for most of our furniture, and we're really finding that these drop-in spaces are helping support and expand the safety net for students on campus. There's always a caring adult waiting for them. They are learning from the adults, getting connected to care. They come in for an appointment. We do crisis triage. Our spaces are filled with de-stress and self-care activities, so students are really learning about different ways that they can take care of themselves when they're uncomfortable. And we think that having this drop-in center has really helped to destigmatize mental health and wellness services. We just are starting at TAM, and already one of the counselors told me today, actually, that the numbers are just drastically increasing because it really turns the idea of students getting support going from adult to adult, from students coming in and referring themselves and referring friends. And they can also come in and get health education and resources. So that's a little bit of an overview of things that are not going to be touched on in the evaluation. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, great. So,
Oh, wait, I think we do have a question.
Oh,
Meaning you.
Oh, sorry. Student advisory groups at each site. How many students are in that group at each site?
Sure. So last year at Redwood, I think there was 13 on the student council. We had 40 at Drake. We kind of decided that everyone who was interested in our first year, we wanted to say yes to. It kind of dwindled down, but they did amazing work. This year we had about 45 applicants at Drake, and we narrowed it down to 18. So we're now going for a group of about 18 at each school. So it's actually become competitive. We write letters of recommendation for them, and it's a lot of students who don't have leadership opportunities in other places at the school. We talk to counselors and BACR therapists to get names of students who may be struggling themselves with health or mental health issues, and so we encourage a diverse type of leader to come into the space and to learn how to be leaders around these issues that they're really passionate about.
And are you noticing the destigmatization? It was a bullet point. Is that palpable?
I think so. I mean, our centers are packed. So there's 150 students who come through probably every day at Drake. I mean, we can't even house how many people are there depending on the day. Redwood's always packed. And the majority of those students are not receiving services. So they come in, they use the space, they know exactly what it's for. They're not there during class time, but they're there before school, during breaks, during lunch, and after school. And what we're finding is a lot of the students who come in for tea or to look at a health education resource will later come in and refer a friend, or will later come in and when they're having a hard time and refer themselves. We've seen a huge increase in self-referrals and referrals of friends.
Barbara, did you have a question or comment?
What is the interface with the counseling staff at this point in time?
Yeah, we are working hand in hand with our counselors at all three sites. Each school and wellness center has turned out really different. So at Redwood, we're all part of one space. So it's really easy. Like everybody can kind of see who's coming in and we all triage. At Drake, we're in a completely different space. And we've asked, and so many of the first thing we ask students is, how can we support you? How can we help you? Would you like to talk to your school counselor? That's our first line of defense. That's the first thing we ask every student. And many of them, we then escort over to their school counselor. I don't know the numbers exactly, but at least 50% want to go and just need to be connected and know where to go. And then sometimes the school counselors are busy because they have so many students on their caseload. Sometimes we would have to bring them back and see them by one of our wellness providers, but they are always our first go-to. At TAM, we're calling it the Counseling and Wellness Program, and everything is integrated, and even our youth advisories, the counselors are going to sit in on the youth advisory at TAM. So everything we've done, we've invited and worked with counselors, and even for our school-wide events, we invite them to the education that we're doing with peer resource, and then they can be a part of our programs as much or as little as they want. But I would say we're working hand in hand. That's our wellness coordinator's job, is to communicate. Every student who's being seen needs to be communicated with the counselor around.
Thank you.
Unless it's a minor consent service where we don't share that information because it's under HIPAA.
Jacob?
Given that, or this is a kind of a specific question, and it might be a non sequitur, but I know at TAM, we've had a lot of trouble with students' drug use. There have already been a handful of kids who have gotten drug-related suspensions. So with the wellness center, is there a way that it could integrate a restorative justice component into it? Is that going on?
Thank you for asking. It's a really good question. We're actually working with the admin at TAM, and we've created a menu of all of the prevention work that's happening at TAM around alcohol and drugs, all the curriculum that's being implemented, the workshops that we put on, and then we've actually come up with a list of interventions so that we can approach situations with a variety of options. So I can share those lists with you, and we're sharing them a lot with parents, but it's everything from youth court to meeting with our substance abuse counselor from Huckleberry, to we met with Don Carney today, working on creating a set of 3 workshops where students can come through. Every Friday, there's a workshop about drugs and alcohol on campus. So we're trying to think of all different ways to approach alcohol and drugs on campus because it has become a big issue. We're also, our wellness coordinator at TAM is heading up a group of parents and students, and they're meeting once every 2 or 3 weeks around drugs and alcohol and trying to come up with community solutions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Are there structural differences between the 3 programs?
Yeah, very much so. So I think that making sure we all have the same amount of services and same types of services is important, but it's not actually needed at each school. So right now, the exact same services are not across all schools. It really depends on our CRT, our case review team. We bring new partnerships up to the group of counselors, school psychologists, admin, to decide if it's appropriate for the school. So for example, today I just sent out an email about a test-taking anxiety group, and it might not happen at every school. So there's different programs available, but everybody should have equal access. There's no program that can only be at one school or the other, but it really depends on the students' interests and the staff's interest.
Are there differences in the schools in which wellness interacts with the rest of the school staff?
Can you be more specific? What do you?
Well, the relationships, say, between counselors and wellness. Are there differences at the schools?
I think so. I think we'd have different wellness, Jen is here, our wellness coordinator at Redwood, who's developed her relationships with school counselors and school psychologists, and the space that Redwood allows for a really collaborative approach. Whereas at Drake, we are running back and forth down the hallway all the time, and we actually made an artistic pathway to show students that our spaces are connected, but we're physically not together. So I think structurally, that can be difficult. And now at TAM, we're right next to the counselors, which is great. So it seems to be working at each of the schools. And Dr. Shields will let you know, he actually did a staff survey of all of our support staff, so you'll get those results back, because we wanted to ask the stakeholders how they feel like the implementation of the program has felt to them. And so he's going to be sharing those results with you as well.
And one more question. What criteria do you use when selecting the student leaders? What criteria do you use?
That's a good question. We only allow 3 students who are already on ASB and 3 students that are already in peer resource on the council, because we want those leaders, but we want it to be students who don't have the opportunity to be leaders. So what we find is a lot of students from ASB will apply, and if we took all of them, the whole group would be this, same students who are in ASB, and we really want to have a different mix of students and give students who may not have the opportunity to be a leader that opportunity. So it's a pretty diverse group we have 9th graders through 12th graders, and we have an application. They actually fill out an application. They talk about what they think the issues are at the school, how they would approach them, what their skills are, and we've ended up with a great group. I think you guys met some of them last year who were working on a policy and advocacy program. They've kind of divided and decided what they're interested in. They have so many ideas, which is really exciting. The hard part is that we don't meet with them in a class, so it's hard to get traction sometimes around the projects that they want to do. But at Drake right now, they're talking about doing parent education, and they want to go to staff meetings and talk to staff about their experience as students and the stress that they're experiencing. So it's totally student-led. We come up with outcomes and methods for the year that are all created by the students.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Michael?
Yeah. Tell us about, when we had that suicide at Drake, tell us about the role of the Wellness Center and interplay with the counselors there, and to what extent do you think that the work that you did was different than it would have been had this situation arisen in the absence of a wellness center?
I'll say one thing and then you should respond. The number one thing is what we did was we tracked students who dropped in for support. And because we have this space that students know about, we had about 150 students drop in for support, and we tracked them and shared that information with counselors. And that's where they came. They came to the space where they knew to go and where they felt comfortable. Students also went to the school counselors as well, but because our space is bigger and is full of self-care activities and it's just a different environment, we saw a tremendous amount of students. And then we have a way to track all students. So every student that came in, we checked to see if they already have a therapist or they already have mental health providers. We checked in, we did suicide risk assessments, and did all of the follow-up and case management. And counselors were included in all of that. So we created a spreadsheet of all the students that had dropped in so that they knew that their students were coming in. And counselors came in and helped to do risk assessments and to meet with students. Counselors were in our space constantly, and we were in their space because students were kind of all over the campus. So I think just in terms of the destigmatization, kids knew exactly where to go if they were feeling sad, which felt really good.
Wes?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. I don't know if there's something else going on, since there's been several questions about the relationship with counselors, so feel free to talk to me about that if there is a concern about that. But specific to the suicide at Drake, I would say I've talked to some of you since then. I have been involved in 14 suicide responses at schools. I would say this was the smoothest response to a horrific event, and that was solely due to the staff that was present. We had good organization. When we were in negotiations, ironically, when that happened, several of us are in the room who were, when we got that call. A situation like that is very fluid, and it's very emotionally charged. And so we went immediately to the school site. As I stepped into my role, went into the counseling center first. Everyone was engaged, and one counselor in particular was close with the student and was, in my determination, was in no shape to lead the effort at that point. And then we briefed quickly, and then we had very little time to address the staff. But once we got going, as Jessica said, counselors were in the wellness space. Wellness was in the counseling office. Everybody, all of those people, the coordinator, BACR, all of our school counselors that were on site that day. Everybody put in a long shift that day. And we had providers right down to our campus supervisors out bringing kids in. And like Jessica said, the space itself is helpful because it was a place where kids at least knew, if they hadn't been in there, that it was a friendly space where they could get help or assistance or comfort friends or bring friends in. A lot of times what I've witnessed is most of the referrals come from groups of friends. So there will be 3 or 4 friends surrounding someone who's having a difficult time and bring them to whatever port in the storm. For many of them, that was the counseling office. For some of them, that was the assistant principal's office. And for some of them, it was the wellness space. But it did help to have everybody pulling in the same direction. I didn't see any division while I was there that day or the next day or the day after that, or when subsequently I've been following up. And we have been chasing a lot of kids who are on our list and slowly checking them off as we feel that they're ready, not to be followed as closely, but following up with services in the community for a lot of kids. And I think one of the unintended positive consequences, if I try to see the silver lining, is that it really does bring people together, an emotional event like this, and it really does form lasting connections. When you've cried with someone or commiserated with someone, be that an adult or students among themselves, it does bring the community together, and I've seen that. I've seen that at Drake. So in my opinion, I didn't see a rift, and nor have I been approached personally about any rift between how counselors dealt with the events there. All of them were dealing with it in different ways, both personally and professionally, and all of them, in my estimation, did an exceptional job supporting the students. And now we're moving to a place where we need them to support themselves. So after the stressful event is over, then you got to take care of yourself. And I think they've come together. I see a nice working relationship between wellness and counselors at Drake. I really do. But I'd be open to feedback if that's not the case.
No, my question was based on a fear or concern I had when we approved the program in the beginning, that there was every potential for there to be a division between counseling and wellness. And also a risk that the left hand wasn't going to know what the right hand was doing, and I think that's inherent in in this structure, that that it's necessary to keep working on that and to make sure that the left hand does indeed to know what the right hand is up to, and that they're acting in concert.
Absolutely, and if taken from that perspective, yes. I mean, I think we, upon reflection, at least in the 14-15 or 15-16, but we acknowledge the rollout at Redwood was rough. Mistakes were made that I would not replicate going forward, and we're trying not to stumble over those same mistakes in the rollouts at Drake and TAM. What I've seen is a vast improvement, though, in that relationship, those relationships. There's multiple people involved, and a good working understanding of, now that we're a couple years in, of who does what and when, and getting processes down, and it's an iterative process. I mean, there's we're refining it constantly as we go along. So I think one thing that I wouldn't question from the very beginning is that both groups, if I speak to them as separate groups, had their eyes on students as the focus, and I think that's continued, and that service to students is improved as people, like you said, do start knowing how to work together. Getting used to working with each other, and the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing. Yeah. So I understand.
I do think that the tendency towards compartmentalization is always there, and particularly as you have staff turnover, you have to be constantly reinventing the wheel and working on that.
Our wellness coordinators have been invited to counseling meetings. So we joined counseling meetings, we're in CRT, so we've come up with a bunch of ways to communicate and to make sure that we're sharing information and making joint decisions around things that we have in common. You know, like a lot of the health education and prevention, they're just like, do it, you know, like thank you so much and let me know when it is and I'm gonna come, but I have 325 kids on my caseload, but we have actually invited them to be a part of the process if they want to, and there's always some counselors that do, that will actually like come. There was a counselor in our marijuana education yesterday who wanted to come, and it's not their job to put on a marijuana education campaign, but they wanted to be there. So that's great. And it was actually a counselor at Drake who thought of the idea of, they know our community organizations, they're really getting to know the folks who are coming on campus, and it was their recommendation that one of our great organizations run a grief group, and we did. So like they're really, and they're our biggest referrers. The counselors are the ones who refer the majority of students to us. The majority of referrals come from counselors and from students themselves.
And in this case, I'm assuming, though, I mean, it sounds like we've created a much bigger safety net, more resources, you know, just the thing we want, especially at a time like, you know, in December. So, Wes, are you the person then that oversees everything? Are you the ultimate supervisor, manager, conductor that orchestrates everything, makes sure everything's in line? And I'm just curious the structure.
Yes. So,
okay, good.
Yeah. So
okay, thank you.
It's
yeah.
my fault if something doesn't go.
No, I know, no, but no, thank you. No, I didn't mean it that way. Just curious because there's.
No,
I heard so
what,
many. I see Jessica and I see you and I know your amazing background and I just wondered if
Yeah. No, I say that kind of in jest, but that's what keeps me on my toe. You know.
Right.
I
No,
don't
when you know that you're
lose another student or
right.
make a mistake with a kid. So that's, I guess, that fear of failure when I'm in a situation like that is.
Yeah.
I was joking. That was my own internal anxiety.
No, and I appreciated all the communication that went to the parents at Drake, and you know, and that helped them for the students that maybe wouldn't have gone for help. You know, kind of put everybody on alert. I thought it was very comprehensive and really appreciate it. So thank you.
Talk.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Next, just give a holler, turn on that button and say, hey.
I don't want to let this opportunity pass to acknowledge Chuck and I were in the room at negotiations when we saw all of you quietly, calmly move into place there was a kind of choreography that every single person in that room was prepared to support. And that does not come out in a statistic. That's not something typically board members get to see. And to see you all absolutely focused, clearly, on what needed to be done at every level, responding and trying to support people in the room. And then what happened thereafter was phenomenally powerful and a tribute to what you all have done in terms of the kids and a tribute to this community's commitment to student health. So I just, bravo. If I could clap and applaud all of you, I would. Bravo.
Thank you.
It's a joint effort, and I think we're making, we definitely have enhanced the safety net. There's no doubt about it, and I think we are getting students to talk about their mental health and their physical health in a way that is not that common for teenagers, and that's our passion. It's exciting, and we want students to come to us and to come to their counselors when they're feeling bad. So we're doing as many campaigns as we can so students know what to do and where to come, and that they're not alone, and that it gets better.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to add? Or?
No.
Are you sure?
That's
Okay.
more than I intended on adding.
Okay.
So now we're going to turn it over to Dr. John Shields from ETR, and he's going to go over some of the evaluation numbers from the last year and a half. And I would John will do a better job of this, but just remind you this, when we're in this first initial phase, we're really looking at usage and satisfaction more than outcome, because we haven't built up
Enough time
to do that. So it is going to focus on those types of measures.
Thank you, board, for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope that timed the caffeine dosage and the hour correctly, so forgive me if I stumble a little bit. And of course, I want to say a couple things. First of all, this, we have a good number of slides. I'll get through them quickly. If you have any questions, of course, stop me at any time. The data that you are going to see here is a snapshot of a larger pool of data and results that are shared with the advisory team and that are available, of course, to you. So as a data nerd, I hope that I can evangelize here and encourage all of you to try to find time for the larger piece, and hopefully this will entice you to do that. I want to talk about some of the evaluation activities that we've been doing to date, and as Wes and Jessica were saying, we started with the needs assessment process, had the relationship with UC Berkeley School of Social Welfare, which continues, and the goal developmentally with ratcheting up data collection and evaluation is to do a little bit more data and a little bit more rigorous design every year as we go from a process evaluation, which is really counting how many services that we are providing, and then move to a process evaluation that is effective and stable and adds student satisfaction, of course staff satisfaction, and then move to student self-reported measures on those satisfaction surveys, and then to more rigorously collected outcome data that is around psychosocial functioning and ultimately academic performance. And that's the trajectory that we're on. We're not there yet. But what we have been doing is a lot of good work to keep ratcheting up the intensity of the evaluation efforts. So that's very exciting. I do want to say, too, that the data that we're going to look at today are really focused on last school year. And developmentally, where we were there is we launched the computer-assisted service documentation system called WISH about midway through the year, or midway through the fall semester, with a limited number of people, and it's expanded. So the numbers I'm going to show to you today are based on the computer-assisted system, based on spreadsheets that providers were using to document services, and were also based on pencil and paper logs. And so ETR collected all those data and put them into a unified database so we can integrate it into WISH going forward. But as you might expect, that results in some fuzziness in the numbers. My point is that every year that goes by, I get more and more confident in the reliability and validity of the numbers I'm about to present. So going from a conversation that was very emotional and shows really behind the scenes, let's just do some numbers here. 16-17, this is again mostly Redwood. We have 2,610 direct services provided, 645 unique students served. This is the last time I'll mention that we have a combination of data sources. Now, if you have a student name written by a BACR therapist on a paper log, I have to then integrate that into the official name from your student information system. Again, a little fuzzy, but 645 unduplicated kids served. 83,000 minutes of...
I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you mean to have this slide up here?
Oh, I see. I have it.
There you go.
That one?
That's so much easier for me to follow. I'm a visual.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm visual too, which is why I made this wonderful slide.
I love it.
83,000 minutes of direct services and 1,644 individual counseling sessions. So when we look at the direct student services, and of course we have direct student services, one-to-one. We have case management and all the collateral contacts that happen around students that are not face-to-face. We have student-focused meetings, the IEPs, the CRTs, the 504 meetings, all of the meetings with the counseling staff that goes into planning and monitoring implementation of services. And you have student groups and you have school-wide activities, all the prevention and education. This is really looking at those DSS, those direct student services. And you can see that 63% of them are the individual counseling services. It makes up the biggest bulk of services that are being provided, but I don't want to let this slide go by without again saying that there's a whole universe of activity that is not reflected in this slide. I come at it from a data quality perspective, being your evaluator, and I like to show the data that I feel the best about first. So this is those data. This is a pie chart of the...
Next slide.
Thank you. I will not forget to do that again. Primary presenting issues. And what you see in the purple pie here, the other primary issue, is again reflective of the different data sources. If a VACR therapist wrote on a piece of paper that is not a secure environment, they're not going to put the primary issue down. But what we see, as we see in the first year now, in this year as well, that depression and anxiety make up 44% of the presenting issues, followed by family issues, which is a broad swath of issues. Other, I suspect those others probably evenly distributed across these, the odds are. And then I wanted to also show the diversity of issues that wellness is handling in the direct student service context. And of course, only when you do a presentation do you see typos like body image. It's body image, of course. And I like to see these big pie pieces and these very small pie pieces. Because if we don't treat this, it's going to turn into this, right? Mm-hmm. So I get a prevention feel from the distribution in this pie chart. Now, of course, as we expand to the school sites and we implement more staff and we integrate better with the counseling department and admin, these numbers are going to go up. But again, we still need to see them. This is a 58% increase in the number of direct student services provided. There's a 36% increase in the unduplicated count of students served, and a 76% increase in the number of minutes of direct services provided. Now, of course, it's a no...
Yes, look.
I'm just going to forget this one.
Do you want me to use it?
No, it's cool.
I can. I'll know when you need to change it.
So, of course, these numbers, these trajectories are going to be going up. But, of course, we want to see that. And the 76% increase in minutes is really quite amazing. Now, my concern is that we're going to reach a plateau. And what happens in the plateau, because I've been evaluating San Francisco for 15 years, is that what you start to see is a lot more turnover in your clinical and school-based staff as caseloads continue to go up. Because what normally happens is once funders and stakeholders feel that we've reached an appropriate saturation point of staff, we sit there. But the student need, in my experience, keeps coming up. And the unfortunate result is that we see more staff turnover and burnout. So I just want to make you aware we're not there yet, but that's the risk going forward if we don't continually invest in services and in the wellness of our staff. So, support and empowerment groups, 134 group sessions with well over 100 students. These are some of the examples, but not the complete list of the groups that are being provided. And you see some of the diversity in the subjects that are being addressed through the support and empowerment groups. Some of these are therapeutic, some of these are psychoed groups, some of these are places where we can monitor at-risk youth and bring them into DSS services down the road. So that's very nice to see that being integrated into the environment. Education and outreach.
Hey, excuse me, sorry, could you go back to the prior, the one before that?
Yeah.
Portuguese Girls Support Group? Okay, you knew there had to be some kind of question about that. What is that?
One of our school counselors who works with our English language learners came to me last year when we had I wouldn't say large, a significant number of students that were Portuguese speakers that were new to Redwood and new to the country, and that were having some challenges adjusting. She said, what do we have? So I started literally looking up Portuguese-speaking therapists and calling people to see who I could get to come in that would donate their time to our district. I found a great therapist, and she came and led a support group for our students last year. We got an MOU with her. She was great. She's not doing it this fall. She had to go back to Brazil to be with her family, but she's a fantastically licensed therapist in the community. But the girls, I feel like, are really bonded and connected, and since then,
Yeah, so now they're,
schools have
yeah.
adjusted. I feel like they're doing better in the school.
And it's a consequence of the nice slides that Wes and Jessica were talking about, the partnerships with community organizations and the integration of the community so you know who you can reach out to. That enables these very specific services for students, which is, it's nice to see really early on in the developmental age of the wellness system, district-wide, to have this kind of specificity happening. Education and outreach, 105 presentations to classroom, parents, families, teachers, staff, and the overall school community. This is another nice place where wellness partners with the school counseling office to deliver pieces. And over 6,000, this is a duplicated count, of course, but over 6,000 folks went to those presentations. Classroom presentations, 71 of them, nearly 2,000 students on these topics, these really important topics. Wellness 101 is obviously a really important one of just saying to the students what wellness is about, what they can expect at the wellness center, what services are offered. It's a great way of starting that destigmatization process. School-wide events, 12 school-wide events reaching 3,400 students. Here are the names. If you have questions, I'm sure Jen and Jessica can answer what specifically those are. It's nice to see a diversity of school-wide events. Parent and family events, 500 or more parents and family members, caregivers, guardians about these critical topics. Having a daughter at Redwood and a son at Hall, I particularly enjoyed the middle to high school transition one. 11 staff events, which is, of course, very important in not only delivering content and helping teachers and staff understand, and admin understand what's going on, but ongoing integration of the wellness system into the school environment. These are critical. So it's not just about EpiPen trainings, but about encouraging contact between the wellness staff and the counseling staff and the academic staff.
Sorry, can you go back?
Of course.
I noticed that you have marijuana and the teen brain. Is there also an education program that's like nicotine in the teen brain?
We do. We're now at 2P grantees, and so Kelly McGibbon at TAM, there's a 2P coordinator at each school who we actually had a training here 2 weeks ago where there was about 50 students from the different schools who all learned to be teen educators around tobacco. So you'll see those presentations coming to TAM this spring.
I noticed that you mentioned tobacco. Is it also like vape? Okay.
Big focus on vaping and e-cigarettes.
Thank you.
We're going to go over two surveys now. And thanks for hanging with me as I go through these slides so quickly. Staff survey, we polled, sent out the survey to 21 staff, and these are the collateral staff members that are so critical to the integration of wellness into the schools. Your nurses, your school counselors, your administrators, and learning from the lessons of the past, we wanted to make sure that we really assertively go after getting their voices heard. Again, there are a lot of slides that are not being presented here, and I, just as a matter of ethics, show a diversity. I'm not cherry picking. I'm picking things that I think will be most interesting. So here are the staff members who took them. See, we have 8 school counselors, so they're well represented, administrators, school psychs, nurse, and 1 clinical intern. The intern was a school psych clinical intern. Great. Yeah, which was the point of the survey, was to the collateral staff that work with wellness. And so this is based on a qualitative review of comments received, and the top strengths, the top 3, were, as you might expect, the increased service capacity, the linkages to the community, and the enhancements in health ed that are happening. The top recommendations are improved communication coordination. So once a student is referred, getting back to a school counselor as quickly as possible, to the extent possible within HIPAA, is critical. And this is something that I see in all 5 of the Bay Area districts that I work with on evaluating their wellness initiatives. Discouraging the abuse of wellness breaks is another very common thing, to make sure that there's a perception that students aren't using the wellness center to get out of their honors science test or something like that. And that's something that wellness will continue to work on by re-examining the PASS system, by making sure that we diversify what classes we pull from, and balancing that very important piece. Suggestions on physical space. Again, this is 16-17, so a lot of that was around the wellness center at Redwood, which has a new configuration with that doorway now to improve privacy, and you can see the other recommendations there.
Excuse me, I have a question about the sample, the number of staff members who responded. You were saying 8 is a significant number. Well, I don't understand that, because we have way more counselors. And it seems to me we have a larger number of collateral staff providers to this program. So I don't understand how 8 is a significant number.
8 is a significant number in the context of all the staff that we have. It's not all the counselors. I would encourage all the counselors to participate in the survey this year. We can certainly do better, but I think it's not a bad start.
This was only for Drake and Redwood counselors. So there's 10 total, I think, and so we got 8 out of 10. It was voluntary, or 12? It was voluntary, so this is how many actually, we sent quite a few reminders, but this is how many actually chose to participate. But it was just for Redwood and Drake.
We did incentives too. We did gift cards for people that like were randomized.
We did a random drawing for gift cards, yeah. And for students. So some of the results, increased overall focus on student health and wellness. 12 agree. You can read the graphs as well as I can. More classroom presentations is another strong result. Are you satisfied with the quality of services? There's strong satisfaction there. Are you satisfied with the coordination of community partnerships? Still strong. There's some in the middle ground there, but I'm not seeing unsatisfied or very unsatisfied in these graphs. There was, in fact, on all of the satisfaction measures, we had 1 registering dissatisfaction, and that was with the amount of staff wellness opportunities. And so that is something that, even though it's an N of 1, I know Jessica and Wes and the rest of the team are really focused on expanding those opportunities. Moving to the student survey results. Now, in the past, with a needs assessment, we did a census of all students. This year, we tried to reduce burden on not only your wellness staff, but your teachers in the classroom. So we did a random sample. Instead of a census, we have 209 students. I'd like to share a few results. And Jen, not glossing over how hard it is for you to work to get these students in the door, so thank you very much. We randomly select a list, and then Jessica and her team, Jen and her team, go out and actually get the students in the door, and that is not a small task, especially with everything that's going on. So one thing I wanted to focus on to address issues that we reached back to 2014-15 on is that despite the fact that 64% of students in this sample had private medical insurance, 40% of them report that they would not have gotten the services if it were not for the wellness center in the community, in the school, which I think really underscores the importance of having services on campus. Satisfaction, I'm satisfied with the services I receive, very strong. Comfortable talking about private or sensitive topics, very strong. Treat me with respect. Felt heard and understood. And again, I'm looking at the entire continuum here. What I really like is that we have very small percentages of students who are disagreeing to these things. And these are adolescents, and these are adolescents facing significant issues. The depression, the anxiety, the family issues, the stress. These are not insignificant issues that they're facing. I feel safe in the Wellness Center. This is a fantastic result. I would recommend Wellness Center services to another student. Again, given the respondents, I think this is an amazing result. At 86% would recommend that a friend come to Wellness. So here's what I spoke earlier about our developmental trajectory of trying to improve the rigor of our evaluation. We're in that stage where we're starting to do some self-reported outcomes. It's not standardized testing just yet, but it is a nice preliminary thing. So I'm better able to manage my stress. Again, I'm looking at the diversity here. I see a relatively small proportion of disagree and strongly disagree. I think that on its face, a 61% agree is quite strong. Again, because we can't tease these data apart yet according to what they're working on in services. Feel better about myself, better able to succeed academically, better able to cope when things go wrong. This is a really strong one at 72%. More satisfied with my life right now. Again, as a father of 2 teenagers, to see 63% of your teenagers expressing satisfaction with their life, that's very strong. And finally, in the last 2 slides, it's always nice to supplement some of these numbers with some of the student voices. You can read as well as I can, but this second one is really amazing. So on 2 angles, that the students feel comfortable enough sharing and being vulnerable enough to share this kind of insight with us is really amazing. And learning to cope with this person's stress and depression to the point where it doesn't affect their schoolwork and has a smaller impact on my family and extracurriculars. I still have to work on letting it affect my social life, but my counselor is extremely helpful in getting me to where I am now. That's just a really hopeful message. And here's one final slide. Made me much more wise, giving me a different outlook on life. I don't need to bottle up my emotions, but I can confide in someone in a healthy way. Made me happier and has made me more hardworking and willing to succeed in school. All of the comments are available in reports. All of the charts and graphs are available in reports. To the extent that you're able, I know you have many things going on, I encourage you to dive in to these data, and I thank you for your time and willing to answer any questions you may have. Oh, I'm sorry.
What?
Please forgive me, one final slide. Just as a reminder, What we're doing satisfaction surveys at Redwood and Drake this year, staff satisfaction, and we'll really make sure that we get better staff numbers this year at Redwood, Drake, and TAM. The Berkeley partnership, they're doing a secondary analysis of your California Healthy Kids data, looking at mental health and substance abuse in particular, and its relationship to the experience of school safety and youth developmental assets in the school environment. It's a nice little project. And the second version of the computer system is now used by all wellness providers. And Mr. Ford, in response to your question earlier about right hand and left hand, we are integrating new features that allow school counselors to go into the system and see what services have been provided by the wellness side. So at least and we need to work on integration and usage, but there's the capacity for those right and left hands to communicate through the computer system, which I think is a really nice benefit, and admin can do the same within the limits of HIPAA and FERPA. But it's nice to know if a kid comes in, you can look up and see they had an appointment with their therapist or they were with the nurse 3 times last week for whatever. So that's a nice potential thing. Thank you.
How secure is that?
It is, how secure is the system? The system meets FERPA, HIPAA, and FSMA regulations. We just got our brand new HIPAA certification this year. We've had it before, but the ink is just drying on one from last week. So we are current, up to date, and as secure as it gets.
Better than Equifax, I hope.
I hope so too.
Laura and Michael and Barbara, do you have any questions?
I do. Will the next, the student satisfaction survey give us data about ethnic breakdown of student participation?
Of course. And I do have that available through the reports on paper and online. So we do break them down by ethnicity, race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation.
Okay, thank you.
You've been tantalizing us with this longer report. Is there a link that you can, you're waiting for that question?
Yes, we're waiting to put it up on the website until after we present it to the board.
Okay. And I have another question about the student survey, the 209 students surveyed. Was that just Redwood students or was it also Drake students?
It was Redwood students.
Just Redwood?
Mm-hmm. And because we want them to have enough contact with wellness to be able to answer the questions and give nice feedback for us. So we take a random sample of students who have had 5 or more contacts with wellness. One or more? Sorry, wrong districts. Forgive me.
Okay.
And that was, I don't mind saying, that was significant because we're used to the 5 or more where someone's getting a lot of service. And so it's interesting to see the results because some of the students who participated have only seen somebody one time. So that's important to think about.
In the report, there is an item on tell us how many times you've come to the Wellness Center. You can break it down by that as well.
I have a question. Michael, did you have a question before I jump in? Okay. Early on, you were very clear that the work between the counseling staff and the wellness staff is somewhat fluid. I mean, there's some things that clearly only the wellness program does, and I think you were using the example of the health education and things along those lines. And there is a point, I guess, with the counseling staff. In my head, I think if it's a life coach that, a lot of them do have credentials, but then we'll refer a student to BACR or to wellness. So this whole presentation, it just occurred to me now, are we capturing the students when the students respond and they're talking about their counselor? Are they only talking about wellness or are they talking also about their school counselor? Is it, and because...
Yeah, no, in that particular quote that you saw...
Right, it sounded like counselor, because
I don't know. I don't know who that counselor is.
Because that might really help also, because I think there's a perception with some community members and parents that we have academic counseling over here for their reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then we have this and if they understood better that it really is commingled, and that before we were fortunate to have the program, much more many resources, but we do have counselors that also provide this sort of resource. I think it would just really help with the community, and so just because it's a whole inclusive program. So
And strategically, that's definitely our goal, is to
No, I
be able
understand
to match
that.
up the exact
Right.
say, dosage of service to the students.
Right. I just hit me that because we said wellness, and I just think we might, in the messaging, you might consider how that's made a little more clear when we go out to the public. I'm thinking more in terms of public support.
Okay.
Yeah. Did anyone else on the board have any additional questions or clarifications? Jacob, how about you? Okay, any public comment? Okay, well, thank you. This was very, very interesting. Thank you. Did you have something else, Wes? You seem like so you were just excited to get up and go. You didn't want to come to the podium. David, Dr. Yoshihara, I think you had a suggestion about the agenda and what we could push off to the next time.
Yeah, I've talked with Dr. Topier these last 3 items. F is informational. I mean, we're happy to bring it back. And the last 2 are board policies. Neither of these are urgent. We're happy to bring those back this time.
Even though I know the staffing ratio is near and dear to our hearts with, based on the last meeting, if there's nothing that we can provide input about it tonight, they can't wait. I think the thought was to push that, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so if it's okay, we're going to adjourn the meeting. Okay. Thank you.